Hey guys, tonight we journey into a room where the curtains are heavy. The wallpaper smells faintly of gaslight, and the door latch clicks just a little too firmly behind you. You're in a Victorian bedroom now, and though it may look calm, embroidered pillows neatly stacked, a mahogany bed looming like a carved monument. This is where the real drama of the age simmered. You won't believe this, but the most shocking truths of the Victorian era weren't written in court records or shouted in Parliament. They whispered from behind these bedroom doors. All right, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes. And hey, drop in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is there. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. The first thing you notice is how deliberately sealed the room feels. Curtains are pulled thick and close, not just to block the chill, but to block the eyes of neighbours and servants. Respectability is everything, and the Victorians guard their private quarters like a stage set before the performance begins. Bedrooms weren't merely for sleep. They were places where identity was curated, where secrets were both hidden and revealed. You stand in the centre of the room, listening. Out in the hallway, footsteps fade, the household slipping into silence. Once the last candle downstairs flickers out, this chamber transforms. A woman in a corset might finally unlace herself, sighing with relief as she sheds the day's public mask. A man might sit on the edge of the bed, staring at his boots, replaying conversations he could never admit to his wife. The Victorian obsession with propriety meant that every outward smile hid an inward storm, and the bedroom became the one arena where both could quietly unravel. Even the furniture is complicit in the performance. That towering wardrobe over in the corner, it looks ordinary enough, but inside, carefully folded gowns and tucked away letters tell stories that never leave these four walls. Visitors to the home would never see this side of life. Parlours were for show, but bedrooms were for truth. Though even here, truth was layered in fabric and lace. You shift your gaze to the curtains. They're thick damask, heavy enough to smother sound. And that was the point. Noise carried in those thin-walled Victorian houses, and with servants tucked just outside, silence was safety. A whispered argument between husband and wife, or the creak of the floorboards when someone left their bed in the middle of the night. Those sounds could travel like scandal on the wind. Curtains weren't just decoration, they were the insulation of reputation. And yet, for all the hush, the bedroom wasn't always peaceful. Imagine lying in that bed as the coal fire spits and crackles in the grate, throwing smoke into the air. The Victorians often believed fresh night air was dangerous, so windows were kept firmly closed, locking in fumes and odours. You breathe in, and it's thick. Dust, candle wax, perfume and human sweat mingling together. The irony is, many families thought this was healthy, protective. One curious fact: some families went so far as to lock their bedrooms at night, not just against burglars, but against their own servants. The hierarchy was rigid, but temptation and curiosity knew no bounds. A locked bedroom was a fortress, a signal that whatever happened inside was to remain invisible. It didn't always work, of course. Servants noticed everything, but the gesture spoke volumes about the anxieties of the time. Still, the strangest part is how ordinary it all looks. The bedspread is tidy, the wallpaper floral, the carpet thick underfoot, and yet every detail is a mask. You feel it as you stand there, the secrecy pressing in, the drama simmering beneath pleats of fabric and creaks of wood. The Victorian bedroom is calm on the outside, chaos within, and this, right here, is where our journey begins. You sit on the edge of that grand Victorian bed, the carved mahogany posts towering like watchmen. It feels more like a throne than a place to sleep. And that's the thing. Beds weren't just furniture back then. They were statements. A respectable family would splurge on an enormous four-poster, draped in curtains heavy enough to drown out a thunderstorm. It said, "We are proper, we are solid, we are safe." But beneath all that grandeur you can almost hear the creaks of secrecy. Picture this. The master of the house lies stiff on one side of the mattress, while his wife, corset marks still faint on her skin, keeps to her own side. Their bodies never touch. Victorian society loved to pretend that marriage was a tidy arrangement of virtue, but the bedroom often told another story. Husbands spent nights at gentlemen's clubs or working late. Wives filled diaries with thoughts that never saw daylight. Some couples went further, keeping entirely separate bedrooms, a fact that shocked visiting foreigners, but was considered proper among the upper class. The irony? For all this obsession with modesty, bedrooms were not always truly private. Servants were constantly in and out, delivering hot water, banking the fire, shaking out linens. They moved like shadows, silent and watchful, and though they were supposed to see nothing, they saw everything. Later, downstairs, those whispers would turn into gossip, slipping through kitchens and pantries faster than the smell of a roasting mutton. Bedrooms might have been locked fortresses, but secrets always found cracks to escape. There's a quirk you wouldn't expect. Some Victorians believed that the act of sleeping too close together was unhealthy, that sharing breath could drain vitality. So, couples kept space, or even separate rooms, under the guise of health. Doctors of the day sometimes encouraged it, offering a veneer of science to what was just social anxiety dressed up in medical jargon. Imagine explaining that to a guest. Oh, we don't share a bed, for health reasons. Respectability saved. But bedrooms weren't only about relationships, they were theatres of status. Look around this one. The wallpaper thick with ornate floral patterns, a little gaudy, maybe even suffocating. Gas lamps flicker in glass shades, making shadows stretch across the plaster ceiling. A visitor, if ever allowed inside, would immediately read the wealth of the family from the softness of the carpet and the gleam of the wardrobe handles. Yet beneath all that pomp, the real story played out in sighs, in unspoken words, in folded letters hidden under mattresses. You lean back against the headboard and imagine the countless conversations this room has absorbed. Confessions whispered in the dark, arguments hushed so the children wouldn't wake, promises made and broken. The Victorians were masters of silence, but their bedrooms carried echoes all the same. And here's the strangest thought. While the parlour showcased the family to society, the bedroom revealed the society itself, its fears, its pretences, its hunger for appearances above all else. So, as you pull the curtains tighter and let the coal fire burn low, remember, this room is not just a place to rest. It's the Victorians' most guarded stage, where reputation survived or crumbled in the dark. And tonight, you're sitting right at the edge of it, listening to the silence that hides more than any words could tell. The house grows quieter as you move down the corridor, and suddenly you notice something odd. 2 doors side by side. Both are grand, both polished, and both lead into bedrooms. Not his and hers in the romantic sense, his and hers in the literal sense. You ease one door open and step into the master's room. The bed is smaller than you expect for a man of stature, neatly made with stiff sheets and a heavy quilt. A shaving stand sits nearby, a pocket watch resting on the table. Everything speaks of order and routine. Across the hall, the wife's room is another world. Frilled pillows, lace draped over the dresser, a perfume bottle half empty on the vanity. The air carries a faint floral scent, mingled with powder and candle smoke. You can picture her sitting here in silence, brushing out her hair, while her husband does the same across the corridor, their lives parallel but carefully divided. This separation wasn't strange to Victorians. In fact, among the middle and upper classes, it became a mark of refinement. To modernise, it feels cold. Why would a married couple choose to sleep apart? But to Victorians, it was sensible, even necessary. Doctors warned about the dangers of night air and the risks of illness spreading through breath. Some even suggested that men and women sleeping together drained each other's vitality, leaving them pale and weak. And so, separate rooms became not only a matter of convenience but also of health. But health was just the polite excuse. The deeper truth was about control. By dividing their sleeping arrangements, couples created clear boundaries between intimacy and performance. The marriage bed wasn't simply a place of closeness, it was a contract. Proper airs, social appearances, nothing more. Emotional warmth wasn't the goal, respectability was, and by keeping bedrooms apart, the facade could be more easily maintained. What makes you pause, though, is the sheer loneliness of it all. Imagine her, in her lace-lined room, waiting for footsteps that might never come. Imagine him, across the way, staring into the firelight, wondering if tonight he should visit, or if it would look more proper to stay away. The Victorian bedroom system, so proud of its order, often built walls not only between husband and wife, but between longing and fulfillment. And yet, behind these locked doors, the story wasn't always so tidy. Some couples found freedom in separation, sneaking across halls for clandestine visits that felt more like affairs than marital duty. Others found comfort in solitude, cultivating lives apart while maintaining the outward shell of unity. Either way, the double doors tell you everything. Intimacy in this era was a performance carefully choreographed, even when the stage was hidden from the world. One little detail might make you smile. In some grander houses, bells were wired from the wife's room to the husband's, so she could signal discreetly if she wished him to visit. A mechanical whisper through the walls. Practical, but also strangely romantic, if you can call formality wrapped in brass wires romance. It's a reminder that even in the most rigid of times, people found ways to bend the rules of respectability, if only slightly. You sit in her chair now, facing the mirror, and it feels as if the room itself is watching you. These divided spaces carried more than furniture. They carried the weight of a society terrified of breaking its own rules, and those rules shaped not only how people lived, but how they loved, or failed to. You cross back into the master's bedroom and notice how bare it feels. No lace, no perfume bottles, no sentimental trinkets, just the essentials of a man's nightly ritual. A pocket Bible sits on the table, a pipe tucked discreetly into a drawer, boots standing neatly by the hearth. The bed looks more like a soldier's cot than a place of warmth, its stiff sheets tucked with military precision. This division of space is more than preference. It's ideology carved into the architecture. The Victorians were obsessed with order, and that obsession extended into their most intimate spaces. Bedrooms were meant to reflect moral discipline. A husband's chamber was a domain of stoic masculinity. A wife's, a carefully curated shrine of domestic femininity. Separate beds, even separate wings in some homes, allowed each role to be performed without interference. What strikes you is how much effort went into appearances. These weren't just places to sleep. They were statements of virtue, little theatres of respectability where the scripts had been memorised by everyone in the household. But here's the quirky twist. In many households, it wasn't only about propriety or health, it was about practicality. Beds were often too small and too hot for two people, especially with heavy wool blankets and no central heating. Coal fires made one side of the room roasting while the other remained freezing. Sharing a bed could mean sweating through the night or shivering miserably. Some families even recorded that sleep was more restful apart since a restless partner could keep the other awake for hours. So yes, separate rooms were proper, but they were also a relief. Imagine trying to sleep with thick bedclothes while someone else hogs the covers. The Victorians solved it with distance. Still, the symbolism mattered. When guests visited, they knew which door belonged to the husband and which to the wife. It told them the household was respectable, ordered, and modern. The idea of spouses clinging to each other in one bed seemed almost uncivilized, something for peasants or the lower classes who lacked the luxury of space. In a strange way, love was measured by absence, not closeness. A household with 2 bedrooms could claim refinement. One with a shared bed suggested poverty. You glance toward the wife's adjoining room again and picture her lying awake. Maybe she listens for footsteps in the corridor, wondering if her husband will come knocking, or perhaps she hopes he won't, preferring her solitude. Diaries of Victorian women hint at both desires, yearning for companionship on one page, relief at separation on the next. The truth was as complicated as the society itself. To admit longing was to admit weakness. So many turned to ink and paper, leaving behind private journals that revealed a hidden spectrum of emotions. Servants, of course, noticed all of this. They had to. They were the ones preparing both rooms, lighting fires, turning down beds, setting out water. They could tell instantly if the husband had stayed put or crossed into his wife's chamber. And though propriety demanded silence, gossip was inevitable. What happened in these double bedrooms rarely stayed contained. Down in the scullery, maids whispered stories of which bell rang at midnight, of which fires burned late, of which doors stayed locked. Bedrooms may have been divided, but the household always knew. There's even a peculiar detail worth remembering. In some wealthier homes, brass bells connected the wife's room to the husband's. She could signal discreetly if she wanted him to visit, sparing her the humiliation of crossing the hallway herself. It sounds mechanical, almost cold, but it was also oddly intimate. A small ring echoing through the stillness of the night, carrying more weight than any spoken request. It's funny, isn't it? The Victorians built physical walls between themselves, but those walls were paper thin against curiosity. Even with 2 doors, 2 beds and 2 fires, the truth of marriage had a way of slipping through the cracks. And as you sit in the dim firelight, you realise the double bedroom was less a sanctuary than a stage, where every absence or presence carried meaning and every silence echoed louder than words. You shift your attention from the polished beds and separate rooms to something more practical, though no less awkward, the chamber pot. Sitting quietly under the bed or tucked into a wooden cabinet, it was a constant presence in the Victorian bedroom. By day it was hidden away, discreetly covered, but by night it became the silent witness to the least glamorous side of life. You lift the lid and the smell rises up, sharp and sour. For all their obsession with propriety, Victorians lived with this nightly reminder that even refinement couldn't escape biology. Historical building surveys from 1851 explicitly listed service staircases as a common feature in new middle-class homes, confirming these hidden roots were not just imagined but officially recorded. It's almost comical to imagine. A grand lady in silk night clothes, her hair pinned up neatly, rising in the middle of the night and shuffling across the carpet to perch on a porcelain pot. The chamber pot was made of china in wealthy homes, often decorated with dainty floral patterns, as if roses painted on the rim might disguise its purpose. In poorer houses, it might just be a plain tin vessel, cold and noisy. Either way, every bedroom had one. Indoor plumbing was still a luxury, and the trek to an outdoor privy in the rain or cold of night was unthinkable. Yet the embarrassment lingered. Servants had the unenviable duty of emptying these pots each morning. Imagine the quiet shame of leaving behind last night's evidence for someone else to carry down to the yard. Manuals of household management never mentioned chamber pots outright. They were necessary articles tucked under euphemisms because polite society pretended such things barely existed. But everyone knew. There's a strange quirk you'd hardly believe. Some chamber pots were designed with lids that doubled as cushioned seats, upholstered like little stools. A guest might even mistake one for a proper chair, until it was lifted. Others came in matching bedroom sets, disguised to blend in with washstands and basins. Respectability demanded not that these needs vanish, but that they be hidden under a layer of porcelain charm and upholstery. You can almost hear the scrape of one being pulled out from under the bed in the middle of the night, the awkward shifting of a person trying to keep balance in the dark. No gaslight then, just a candle stub flickering dangerously close to the sheets. A spill was not only humiliating but dangerous. Soaked rugs, stained linens, or worse, a fire if the candle tipped. Bedrooms might have looked stately, but in practice they were full of small nightly hazards. And think of the conversations servants might overhear. A maid carrying away a pot could tell if the master was unwell, or if the lady's stomach had been unsettled after a dinner party. These quiet clues became part of the household's unspoken knowledge, fueling gossip below stairs. In a way, chamber pots betrayed secrets just as much as love letters or creaking floorboards. It's almost endearing, the effort Victorians put into covering what couldn't really be hidden. A floral pot, a velvet lid, a discreet cupboard, and still, everyone knew what was inside. Even the most respectable household couldn't escape the daily reminder that behind all the lace and mahogany, human needs had their say, and that tiny porcelain vessel sitting patiently beneath the bed held a truth the Victorians tried very hard not to admit. Respectability always had a smell. You kneel beside the bed, imagining how unavoidable the chamber pot was in every Victorian household. Its presence says more about the era than the grandest canopy or the most ornate wallpaper. While middle-class families might own pots of polished china, decorated with delicate violets or roses, poorer homes settled for tin or enamel. But no matter the material, the ritual was the same. In the morning someone had to carry it away, that someone was rarely the owner. More often it was a maid, grimacing as she walked the sloshing vessel down narrow stairs, past curious siblings, past the scullery door, out into the yard where privies waited. It was thankless work, yet another reminder of the invisible labour that made respectability possible. And here's the detail you wouldn't expect. Victorians joked about chamber pots more often than you'd think. Popular humour magazines of the time sometimes printed cartoons of bachelors tripping over them in the dark, or clumsy guests mistaking them for footstools. It was the kind of humour that let people laugh at what couldn't be admitted aloud. After all, everyone owned one. Pretending otherwise was pointless. So instead they wrapped the truth in jokes, winks, and coded sketches, letting off just enough steam to preserve dignity. Still, shame lingered. A visitor staying overnight in a respectable household might have to share a bedroom, and with it, share the chamber pot. The awkwardness of using it while someone else pretended to sleep nearby must have been excruciating. Guests sometimes left diaries confessing the discomfort, describing how they tried to wait until morning but gave up when the cold became unbearable. In that moment, dignity collapsed and necessity ruled. The irony is that the Victorians were also living through a revolution in plumbing. By the 1850s and 1860s, water closets, early flushing toilets, were becoming available in wealthier London homes. Yet not everyone trusted them. Rumours spread that the new pipes carried foul air back into the house, bringing disease. Many families insisted on keeping chamber pots even when plumbing was installed, believing they were safer, more reliable, and less shocking to delicate sensibilities. A pot under the bed was embarrassing, yes, but at least it didn't require explaining to a guest unfamiliar with modern contraptions. And what about the children? In nurseries, tiny painted potties shaped like animals sometimes stood ready, teaching little Victorians the same habits. It's strangely tender to picture a child perched on a painted rabbit or swan, while a nanny supervised with a mixture of patience and resignation. Even in these small moments, propriety shadowed every act. You lean back and realise that the chamber pot, humble as it is, captures the Victorian paradox perfectly. On the one hand, they drape their lives in lace, moral strictness, and polished mahogany. On the other, beneath those layers, sat a pot of porcelain that no amount of floral paint could disguise. It's a reminder that even the most rigid societies can't suppress the simplest truths of being human. And as you imagine the scrape of ceramic across the floorboards, the clink of a lid, and the whispered shuffle of a servant at dawn, you see why the bedroom was more than just a place of rest. It was a place where appearances collided with reality every single night. You glance toward the vanity table in the corner, a little stage of glass bottles and small jars. The flickering gaslight dances across them, sending glints of amber, green, and rose-coloured glass onto the wallpaper. They look innocent enough. Lotions, powders, tonics. But behind those pretty facades lies another layer of Victorian bedroom secrets. Perfume and poison often shared the same shelf. Court records from 1848 describe burglars apprehended in Islington after police discovered a concealed safe room within a townhouse, offering proof that such defensive spaces existed beyond rumour. Take that little vial of smelling salts. It was meant to revive a fainting lady, a symbol of delicate femininity. But beside it might sit a bottle of laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, prescribed casually for headaches, coughs, or sleeplessness. One spoonful could calm the nerves, too many could spiral into dependence, and yet laudanum was everywhere, as common in middle-class bedrooms as tea in the parlour. Cosmetics told their own dangerous story. Women often dusted their faces with powders made from lead or mercury, unaware that these substances slowly poisoned the skin, causing sores, discoloration, even illness. At night, a lady might sit by her vanity applying creams that promised radiance, while silently leaching health from her body. The contradiction is almost cruel. Society demanded beauty, but the very tools it offered were toxic. You can picture it. A wife waiting in her bedroom, dabbing a little rouge onto her cheeks before her husband visits, hoping to appear fresh and lively despite the day's exhaustion. He might never know that the colour came from a tin of vermilion powder that carried arsenic in its bright hue. Respectability wasn't just exhausting, it was hazardous. And it wasn't only the women. Men kept bottles of patent medicines on their side tables too. Tonics promising virility, powders for indigestion, drops for nervous weakness. Many of these concoctions were nothing more than alcohol laced with cocaine or opiates. A respectable gentleman could be half dependent on stimulants without ever admitting it, his little bottles lined up discreetly beside the Bible and the pocket watch. Interestingly, some women hid arsenic wafers in their bedrooms, not as poison for enemies, but as beauty aids. Arsenic was believed to clear the complexion, giving skin a pale porcelain glow. Of course, it also damaged the body, sometimes fatally, but the allure of beauty in an age of rigid ideals was strong enough to outweigh fear. Imagine swallowing tiny chips of poison, convinced they were your ticket to admiration at the next ball. Even perfume, meant to mask odours of coal smoke and unwashed bodies, carried risks. Some scents were so heavily laced with chemicals they caused headaches, nausea, or fainting. And yet no respectable bedroom could be without them. Better to risk a dizzy spell than to smell like the street outside. You lean closer to the vanity, catching the faint trace of rosewater mixed with something sharper. The bottles gleam invitingly, but suddenly the room feels more dangerous. This was the paradox of Victorian bedrooms. Spaces meant for safety and intimacy were also filled with hidden hazards. Beauty and peril sat side by side, and no one dared to speak of the risks aloud. The chamber may have looked serene, with its embroidered cloths and polished wood, but the air was thick with unseen poisons. Every dab of powder, every spoonful of syrup carried both promise and threat. And tonight, as you imagine sitting before that mirror, you realise how deeply the Victorians trusted in dangerous comforts, comforts that could kill as easily as they soothed. You sit at that vanity a little longer, the glass bottles staring back at you like silent conspirators. Imagine the ritual every Victorian woman knew by heart, removing pins from her elaborate hairstyle, combing out tangles with a silver-backed brush, then reaching for her powders and creams. In the glow of lamplight, it must have looked almost sacred, except the altar was vanity, and the offering was health. The irony is rich. This was an age obsessed with purity, modesty, and moral cleanliness, yet bedrooms were filled with arsenic-laced powders, mercury skin lotions, and cocaine-laced toothache drops. What the Victorians called restoratives would terrify a modern pharmacist. Yet, because the labels came with flowing script, ornate seals, and polite assurances, people swallowed and dabbed without question. The bedroom became a chemist's lab, only without a scientist to guide it. Picture a husband pouring himself a stiff measure of tonic before bed. The label promises relief from nervous exhaustion or male weakness, but what it really contains is raw alcohol mixed with exotic stimulants. He takes it, lies down in his grand carved bed, and within minutes his mind is hazy, his nerves numbed. His wife, meanwhile, swallows a laudanum tincture to ease the headache left by hours of corset wearing. 2 people under one roof, each in separate beds, each sliding into chemically induced sleep. Respectability demanded composure by day. The bedroom offered bottled shortcuts by night. And then there were the perfumes. Heavy scents of violet, rose and musk filled the air, not just to smell pleasant, but to mask the stench of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, or worse. But perfumes weren't innocent either. Some contained compounds that triggered fainting or migraines. Diaries from the time record women swooning not from tight corsets, but from overwhelming fragrances trapped in poorly ventilated bedrooms. The smell of roses could make you ill faster than the damp London fog outside. A curious fad swept through in the 1870s, arsenic complexion wafers. Sold discreetly, these little tablets promised a smooth white glow to the skin, and astonishingly, women bought them in droves. The risk of stomach pains, vomiting, even organ failure was rarely discussed. Advertisements spoke instead of elegance, refinement, and the radiance of youth. Imagine a woman sitting on the edge of her bed in candlelight, slipping one into her mouth with trembling fingers, believing she was choosing beauty over decay. Men had their quirks too. Some kept vials of phosphorus elixirs, advertised to restore energy after a long day. Taken too often, these caused jaw necrosis, literally rotting the bone. Yet they remained popular, a strange secret shared between gentlemen's drawers and bedside tables. The poison was hidden in plain sight, just another part of the nightly ritual, and the strangest part. None of this felt shocking to them. It was normal. A lady's vanity was expected to sparkle with glass vials, powders, and perfumes. A gentleman's table was expected to hold bottles of restorative cordials. Bedrooms were quiet laboratories of private indulgence, where society's obsession with appearances outweighed any whisper of danger. So when you look around this room, soft lace curtains, embroidered linens, the faint scent of rosewater, it all seems gentle, proper, serene. But beneath the lace, poison breathed. Every polished jar told a story of hope, vanity, and risk. And as you leave the vanity and step back into the hush of the chamber, you realise the real danger of the Victorian bedroom wasn't what lay outside in the foggy streets. It was what sat in crystal bottles, glowing softly on the bedside table, waiting for the next midnight ritual. You turn from the glittering vanity toward the shadowy space beneath the bed, and suddenly the room feels less like a sanctuary and more like a stage. The ornate bed frame rises high off the floor, leaving a dark cavity below. It isn't empty. Sometimes, quite literally, another life lurked down there. In grand houses, it was not unheard of for a lady's maid or a child's nurse to sleep in a makeshift cot close to the mistress's bed, or even curl up on a thin pallet tucked beneath. Privacy, in the modern sense, was a rare commodity. Servants were always near, too near. Imagine lying in that stately bed trying to drift off, while just a few feet away a maid dozed lightly, waiting to be called at a moment's notice. In many homes, bells ran from the bedside straight to servants' quarters, but in others, proximity was the shortcut. The bedroom wasn't just for the family, it was a workplace. And like any workplace, it had its hierarchy, tensions, and silent observers. One in middle and upper-class homes, live-in servants made up a significant portion of the household, often outnumbering the family itself. A wealthy couple might employ a lady's maid, a valet, a nurse, a housemaid, all of whom had daily access to their master's most intimate spaces. Bedrooms were swept, fires stoked, linens changed. That constant presence blurred the line between public and private. Some families went further. Victorian gossip columns occasionally reported stories of servants discovered hiding under beds, not because they were supposed to be there, but because curiosity or scandal had drawn them in. Imagine the shock of a master pulling back the covers only to find a wide-eyed scullery boy crouched underneath, having snuck in to overhear conversations or simply to warm himself near the fire. It sounds absurd, but newspapers thrived on such tales, half warning, half entertainment. You crouch down, peering into the shadows beneath this particular bed. Dust gathers thick on the wooden boards, but you can almost picture a small pallet laid down, a folded blanket, maybe even a discarded shoe. The floorboards creak softly, as if someone had shifted there once. It makes you realise how porous the boundaries of the Victorian bedroom really were. The master and mistress imagined themselves hidden, but the eyes and ears of the household were never far away. And think of what those ears picked up. Servants heard arguments muffled by curtains, caught fragments of whispered conversations, noticed when doors opened late at night. A valet knew which nights his master left his chamber. A maid knew when her mistress wept quietly into a pillow. They might never speak it aloud to their employers, but downstairs in the servants' hall those details became part of the living folklore of the house. Secrets had a way of trickling down with the morning tea. The awkwardness of this arrangement extended beyond gossip. For a young servant, the proximity to wealth and intimacy could be intoxicating, confusing, even dangerous. Some masters exploited it, others ignored it. But the possibility of blurred boundaries haunted the Victorian bedroom. The silent presence under the bed was more than literal, it was metaphorical too. Always there, always watching. You pull back, uneasy. The heavy curtains and polished furniture can't disguise the fact that the Victorian bedroom was never truly private. It was an arena with an audience hidden in plain sight. And tonight, as you glance at the bed, you wonder if the silence you hear now isn't really silence at all, but the quiet breathing of someone waiting in the shadows. You ease yourself down onto the grand Victorian mattress, and the silence of the room thickens. But it's an uneasy silence, because you can't shake the feeling that you're not alone. That shadow beneath the bed, or the soft rustle in the adjoining chamber, carries more weight than the ticking clock on the mantel. In this era, bedrooms weren't just for family. They were arenas where servants lingered, half visible, half invisible, part of the furniture yet always observing. Take the lady's maid, for instance. She might sleep just a few steps away, curled on a cot at the foot of her mistress's bed. Her job was to wake at any sound. The groan of a corset stay breaking, the cry of a child from the nursery, or even the quiet summons of her mistress needing company in a sleepless night. She was near enough to hear whispered prayers, near enough to see tears wiped away in the darkness. To serve meant to witness. And then there was the valet. His ears were just as sharp, attuned to his master's movements. Did the boots clatter back into place at 2 a.m? Did the master's door remain firmly shut, or was it left ajar as he crossed into his wife's chamber? These details, so small, formed the silent diary of the household. A diary written not with ink but with observation. The oddest stories drift up from newspapers of the time. Tales of servants caught quite literally under the bed. Not all were malicious. Some were simply curious or desperate for warmth. But a few scandals hinted at something more salacious, of secret meetings or eavesdropping gone too far. One lurid report described a maid discovered beneath her mistress's bed during an argument between husband and wife. She claimed she had simply hidden to avoid being scolded for unfinished duties. The paper, of course, suggested otherwise, feeding readers' appetite for scandal. Even when no one was physically under the bed, the idea lingered. Servants were everywhere. They lit the fire before dawn, emptied the chamber pot, smoothed the quilt, brushed the carpets. Their labour seeped into every corner of the room. For the family, it was easy to pretend that the bedroom was private, but the truth was that it was constantly staged and restaged by unseen hands. A pillow smoothed differently, a sheet turned at an unfamiliar angle. These little signs betrayed presence, and gossip flowed with the linens. Downstairs in the servants' hall these nightly observations became currency. A maid might whisper that the mistress's eyes were red in the morning, or that the master's bed looked untouched. Another might smirk knowingly when bells rang unusually late. Respectability upstairs depended on silence downstairs, but silence was never perfect. It makes you realise that the Victorian bedroom wasn't only layered in lace and wood, it was layered in surveillance. Invisible witnesses, half hidden under the bed or hovering at the door, gave the lie to the idea of privacy. Even in their most intimate spaces, the upper classes were never truly alone. Every sigh, every quarrel, every creak of the floorboard had an audience. And as you lie back now, staring up at the carved canopy, you can almost hear the faint exhale of someone else in the room. Not hostile, not even intentional, just present. Watching, waiting, bearing silent witness to the secrets you thought were yours alone. Your eyes drift across the room, past the carved bed and the heavy curtains, and land on the wardrobe. At first it looks ordinary. Polished mahogany, brass handles shining faintly in the lamplight, But in a Victorian bedroom, nothing was truly ordinary. Wardrobes weren't just for gowns and coats. They were guardians of secrets. You run your hand along the surface, feeling the cool wood, and wonder what lies hidden inside. Victorians had a passion for storage. Drawers, boxes, and cabinets filled their bedrooms, each one layered with meaning. Open a wardrobe, and you might find rows of gowns carefully pressed, folded shawls, and a stack of neatly wrapped gloves. But tucked behind those everyday items could be something more delicate. A bundle of letters tied with ribbon, a pressed flower from a long-forgotten admirer, or perhaps even a photograph discreetly hidden under a pile of linens. The Victorian bedroom doubled as a vault, a place where reputations could be protected or destroyed with a slip of paper. One mainstream fact stands out. Wardrobes and chests often had hidden compartments. Cabinet makers of the 19th century prided themselves on creating little sliding panels or false bottoms, meant for valuables, jewellery, documents, or cash. In a time when theft was a constant worry, and banks not always trusted, families stored their treasures close, right in the room where they slept. A wardrobe wasn't just furniture. It was a private bank vault with a key worn on a ribbon around the lady's neck. And yet, the quirky side emerges. Not all those compartments held valuables. Some sheltered scandal, letters from secret lovers, risque novels banned from the parlour shelves, or trinkets meant never to be discovered by respectable eyes. One story circulated about a maid stumbling upon a box of pressed flowers and finding tucked among them a lock of hair, not from the master of the house, but from the stable boy. Such discoveries never stayed quiet long. Secrets spilled quickly in households where dozens of eyes watched everything. You lean closer to the wardrobe now, imagining the smell of camphor clinging to wool coats, the faint sweetness of lavender sachets meant to keep moths away. The air inside is thick with time. You picture a hand slipping in late at night, not for a dress but for a folded letter, opened and read by the faint glow of a candle stub. The secrecy is almost tangible, and it wasn't just wardrobes. Bedside tables often carried their own discreet hiding places. A drawer might contain rosary beads and a prayer book on the surface, but beneath them lay something else, a tiny corked vial of laudanum, or a scrap of paper with writing so faint it could only be read in daylight. Every drawer was a double life, a balance between propriety and desire. The irony is rich. A Victorian parlour displayed order, virtue and taste, while the bedroom concealed the hidden chapters. Families prided themselves on appearances, but inside these carved wooden boxes were fragments of truths they couldn't speak. Secrets might slumber for years in the dust of a drawer, only to come tumbling out when the furniture passed hands, when a daughter inherited her mother's dressing chest and found, nestled beneath lace, a note that shifted the family story forever. The wardrobe stands silent in the corner now, its doors firmly shut. But you know better. Behind that polished veneer lies not just clothing, but a labyrinth of whispers. In the Victorian bedroom, even the furniture had a double life. You place your hand on the brass handle of the wardrobe and tug. The hinges groan, releasing a puff of air that smells of lavender sachets and mothballs. Inside, gowns of silk and cotton sway gently, like ghosts of dinners past. But your attention slips past the dresses to the drawers below, where the real secrets sleep. Victorians believed in layering privacy. A dress concealed a drawer concealed a panel, and behind that panel, something else altogether. One husband might keep his pocket ledgers hidden there, records of gambling debts or discreet gifts to someone who wasn't his wife. A wife, in turn, might have tucked away a love token from her youth, a pressed flower, a coin, or a portrait miniature of a man her family never approved of. Furniture became conspirator and confidant, holding things that the human heart could not risk speaking aloud. Mainstream fact reminds us that secret compartments were a staple of 19th century craftsmanship. Cabinet makers competed to design ingenious hiding spots, some so cleverly concealed that they weren't discovered until decades later when the furniture was sold at auction. An unassuming writing desk might reveal hidden drawers behind false panels, or a wardrobe might include a false bottom deep enough to hold a packet of documents. The Victorians lived in constant awareness of theft, scandal and propriety, and carpentry evolved to match their anxieties. In some accounts, not all these compartments held love letters or jewellery. Sometimes they hid contraband novels, banned works of French fiction, Balzac, Zola, or racier penny pamphlets, slipped into drawers beneath prayer books. One maid confessed in her diary that she once discovered her mistress's hidden stash of forbidden novels, neatly folded into plain paper wrappings. She read them by candlelight, tucked under her apron, before sliding them back in place. The mistress never knew that her secrets weren't hers alone. Imagine standing in this room late at night, the house asleep, as a figure quietly unlocks the wardrobe. The creak of the door is loud enough to wake suspicion, so every movement is cautious, deliberate. A drawer slides out, a folded letter retrieved, read in trembling hands before being hidden again. The wardrobe is more than wooden nails, it is a witness. And it wasn't just the wealthy. Even modest homes had their own forms of secrecy. A battered chest at the foot of the bed might contain a child's christening gown, a soldier's letter, or pawn tickets from desperate times. For poorer families, the hiding places were simpler, but the stakes were no less high. A hidden pawn ticket could mean the difference between shame and survival. The presence of these secret spaces tells you something deeper about Victorian life. This was a society obsessed with order and appearance, but one that produced endless reasons to hide. Bedrooms, supposedly private, were still full of eyes and ears, servants, children, neighbours. So the furniture became a silent ally. The Victorians didn't just hide money or valuables, they hid their very selves. You shut the wardrobe again, the brass handle warm in your hand. The dresses sway into stillness, the lavender scent fading back into the dark. To anyone else, it looks like an ordinary piece of furniture, but you know better. In the Victorian bedroom, even the furniture breathes secrets, and sometimes those secrets whispered louder than the people who kept them. The lamplight flickers, and your eye catches something odd on the bedside table. A polished wooden box with brass fittings, sitting beside a stack of folded handkerchiefs. At first glance, it looks decorative, maybe for jewellery or letters. But when you lift the lid, the contents make you pause. Strange little instruments, bottles of syrup, odd contraptions with gears and springs. Welcome to another layer of Victorian bedrooms. The medical mysteries hidden right where people slept. This was an era obsessed with health, yet riddled with quackery. Step into any respectable chamber, and you'd find not just perfume and prayer books, but also a scatter of pills, tonics, and odd devices meant to preserve vitality through the night. A gentleman might keep a bottle of restorative cordial at hand, which claimed to cure everything from fatigue to indigestion. The truth, it was mostly brandy laced with opium. A lady, meanwhile, might sip soothing syrup to calm her nerves, unaware that it contained enough morphine to put a grown man to sleep for hours. Mainstream fact, laudanum, the opium and alcohol tincture, was one of the most common household medicines in the 19th century. It was taken for headaches, sleeplessness, menstrual pain, even for calming teething children. Sold freely without prescription, it lived in many a bedside drawer, used as casually as aspirin is today. Doctors prescribed it liberally, and few worried about addiction until much later in the century. But beyond bottles, there were devices, contraptions you wouldn't expect to see in a bedroom. Some families kept health machines that delivered mild electric shocks, believed to stimulate the body and restore vigour. Imagine lying in bed while your spouse quietly hooked themselves to a buzzing little generator, hoping it might cure nervous disorders or weak circulation. The low hum of current through brass handles must have felt both futuristic and faintly ridiculous. And then there were poultices, bandages, and inhalers. A bronchial patient might sleep with a small handheld inhaler by the pillow, filling the room with the scent of turpentine or menthol. Others tucked mustard plasters under nightclothes, enduring the burning sting because doctors swore it drew out illness. Bedrooms weren't just restful sanctuaries, They doubled as sick rooms, their air thick with camphor, vinegar, or pungent ointments. Interestingly, some Victorian households invested in magneto-electric belts. These were wearable contraptions, advertised as miracle cures for everything from impotence to nervous exhaustion. Strapped around the waist or chest, the belts contained magnets and wires meant to rebalance the body's currents. People wore them under their nightclothes, even in bed, convinced that science itself was pulsing them back to health. Most were pure nonsense, but they sold in astonishing numbers. You lean back in the chair now, picturing how surreal these bedrooms must have felt at night. A lady sipping laudanum by candlelight, a gentleman fiddling with a buzzing electric device, the smell of liniment mixing with perfume. Respectable on the surface, but underneath, filled with quiet desperation to fight pain, exhaustion, or fear of decline. The Victorian bedroom wasn't just where secrets of love or propriety were hidden, it was also a private clinic, where remedies and rituals offered comfort even when they carried danger. And as you close the box on the bedside table, you realise the greatest mystery of all wasn't the devices or the potions themselves, but how firmly people believed in them, even as they risked their health in the pursuit of rest. The wooden box shuts with a soft click, but the echoes of its contents linger. You imagine the countless nights when the glow of a single candle illuminated bottles and contraptions, their shadows dancing like strange companions on the wallpaper. To the Victorians, illness and nervous disorders were constant fears, and the bedroom became a laboratory of last resorts. The mainstream truth was simple. Doctors of the 19th century didn't have many cures. Germ theory was only just emerging, and antibiotics didn't exist. So people turned to whatever promised relief. That's why bottles of laudanum, jars of camphorated oil, and packets of pills crowded nightstands across Britain. Many of these were prescribed with confidence by physicians. Others were bought over the counter, advertised in newspapers as miracle solutions. And still, families placed them proudly in the bedroom, not hidden away but kept close at hand, a testament to both trust and desperation. But here's a curious twist. Some inventions straddle the line between medical tool and outright theatre. Take the lung exerciser, a glass contraption that required patients to blow through tubes, supposedly strengthening the chest and warding off consumption. A visitor might glance at one on a table and assume it was a scientific instrument, but in truth it was little more than an elaborate toy. Still, to a Victorian, it was hope embodied in glass and brass. Another oddity, night cure masks. These were fabric or leather contraptions designed to strap around the face, sometimes infused with herbs, sometimes wired with small electrodes. They promised to prevent wrinkles, improve complexion, or stimulate nerves. Imagine slipping into bed under heavy drapes, coal fire smouldering, with your spouse lying across the hall, while you yourself lay in the dark wearing a buzzing leather mask smelling faintly of lavender and ozone. It sounds absurd, yet advertisements praised these devices with solemn conviction. Even ordinary remedies carried hidden risks. Cough syrups often contained chloroform. Sleeping draughts sometimes included chloral hydrate, a potent sedative. Parents slipped Godfrey's cordial to restless children, unaware that its opium base created dependency. Bedrooms were quiet, but their air was heavy with narcotics. Behind closed doors, entire families floated through nights in a haze of chemical calm. Servants again were witnesses. Maids who dusted the nightstand saw the bottles multiply, noticed which medicines ran out quickly and which drawers were locked. Gossip swirled downstairs. The master can't sleep without his powders. Or, the mistress needs her cordial every evening. A medicine bottle was as telling as a diary entry, exposing fears that the family never confessed aloud. And yet, to the people who used them, these rituals weren't foolish. They were essential. In an age of industrial smoke, relentless schedules and fragile health, everyone sought refuge in tonics and devices. Bedrooms became sanctuaries of hope as much as rest, where each sip or gadget promised another day of composure in the daylight world. You picture the scene, a lady blowing into her lung exerciser, a gentleman strapping on his electric belt, the faint hiss of laudanum being poured into a spoon. The coal fire glows, the curtains muffle the street noise, and the whole room hums with faith in strange comforts. Respectable on the outside, quietly desperate within, and as you settle back against the tall headboard, you understand why the Victorian bedroom carried such a dual nature. It was not only the heart of intimacy, but also the battleground of health, where the fight was often lost quietly, beneath the shadows of tonics and contraptions that promise salvation. The fire in the grate has burned low, and the air in the bedroom begins to feel thick. You notice it almost immediately, the weight of it on your chest, the way it clings to your skin. In the Victorian mind, fresh night air was considered dangerous, a carrier of illness. So the windows were shut tight, the curtains drawn, and the room transformed into a sealed chamber where smells and sickness brewed together. Household guides, like Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, first published in 1861, documented how parlours were arranged and occasionally referenced alcoves or cupboards tucked away for discretion. You glance at the layers around you: heavy drapes, velvet upholstery, thick carpets that trap dust in their fibres, and a canopy bed with curtains drawn around it like a tent. To modern eyes it feels suffocating, but to Victorians this was cosy, protective, proper. The less outside air, the safer they believed they were. One mainstream truth was that doctors of the time often warned against sleeping with open windows, fearing miasmas, invisible vapours thought to spread disease. Families followed the advice faithfully, closing off ventilation and filling their bedrooms with coal smoke, perfume and candle soot. It's strange, though, because what they thought protected them actually made them sick. Coal fires belched fumes that irritated lungs, gas lamps leaked fumes of their own, and the thick fabrics absorbed every smell and speck of dust. Bedrooms smelled of more than perfume. They reeked of sweat, damp wool, stale smoke, and the faint tang of illness that lingered long after a fever had passed. In some accounts, to combat the stuffiness, some families turned to odd little solutions. One was the use of fumigators, tiny pans of burning herbs or vinegar-soaked rags waved around the room to purify the air. Another was sprinkling carbolic acid, or even eau de cologne on handkerchiefs to sniff at night, convinced it warded off infection. Imagine lying in bed, the coal fire spitting, while someone wanders the room waving a pan of burning rosemary like an exorcist. The ritual may have been comforting, but the air remained just as foul. You move closer to the window now, but it's latched firmly. Even in summer, Victorians often resisted opening their windows, afraid of drafts. A draft could mean chills, chills could mean sickness, and sickness could mean ruin. Better to sleep in stale warmth than risk the treacherous night breeze. Families passed down horror stories of neighbours who had left a window open and caught pneumonia by morning. But the irony is sharp. Tuberculosis, one of the deadliest diseases of the era, thrived in these closed, airless rooms. Doctors would later discover that fresh air and sunlight were among the best treatments. Yet here, in this chamber, everything was designed to shut both out. The longer you stand in the room, the more you notice its atmosphere. Not just heavy, but almost alive, carrying the ghost of every candle burned, every drop of perfume spilled, every coal fire fed. The walls and fabric seem to breathe with you, a shared lung of the household. You realise that in Victorian bedrooms the smell wasn't just an inconvenience. It was history itself, soaked into the curtains, pressed into the carpets, waiting to rise again whenever the fire crackled to life. And so the Victorian idea of safety, curtains drawn, windows closed, fires roaring, becomes a cruel irony. For all their efforts to protect themselves, the very air of their bedrooms often betrayed them. The longer you linger in the room, the more oppressive the air becomes. You can feel it on your tongue, a mix of coal smoke, damp fabric and stale perfume. The Victorians thought this was comfort, the very picture of respectability. But to you, it feels like inhaling history itself, dense and unrelenting. Consider the bed canopy. Curtains drawn around the mattress created a private cocoon, but that cocoon trapped everything. Breath, sweat, the smoke drifting from the fire. Families genuinely believed those curtains protected sleepers from drafts and night chills. In reality, they created small greenhouses of germs. Tuberculosis and influenza spread most easily in rooms like these, yet no one made the connection. It would take decades before doctors insisted on sunlight and fresh air. Here's the in urban London. The smell of coal wasn't confined to the streets. Inside bedrooms, soot clung to curtains and carpets, turning once bright fabrics grey. Housekeepers waged endless war against dust, but the battle was unwinnable. Doctors of the time even complained about the close, impure atmosphere of bedrooms, yet superstition about drafts kept the windows bolted. One curious case tells us some Victorians tried to counteract the stale air with gadgets called ozonizers. These strange contraptions produced a faint electric spark meant to freshen the room with invisible currents. Advertisements promised purer air and better health. In practice, they created more smoke and a faint metallic tang, making the room feel even stranger. Imagine lying under thick blankets, curtains drawn tight, while a little buzzing box sizzles in the corner. It was marketed as science, but in truth it was just another layer of discomfort. Even scents had a double edge. Women dabbed eau de cologne on their temples to ward off faintness. Men lit incense sticks or burned herbs to purify the atmosphere. Yet the blend of coal smoke, perfume and herbal fumigations only thickened the air further. Guests sometimes described bedrooms as suffocating, but to criticise openly risked insulting the household's sense of propriety. Better to cough politely and endure, and servants bore the brunt of it. They were the ones tasked with beating heavy drapes outside in the cold, dragging carpets into the yard for cleaning, refilling coal grates that filled the room with soot again by evening. They noticed the headaches, the persistent coughs, the fainting fits. But who would they tell? Respectability depended on silence. You lie back now under the heavy quilt and close the canopy around you. It is utterly dark. The air grows warmer with each breath until it feels like you're inhaling the very fabric itself. Somewhere in this silence you can imagine countless Victorians doing the same, convinced they were safe from danger, while in truth they were sleeping in a sealed chamber of illness. The irony is almost poetic. A society that prided itself on refinement and cleanliness suffocated itself nightly with its own obsession. Bedrooms weren't just private, they were prisons of air. And as you breathe in the musty scent, you realise that the smell of the Victorian bedroom was more than sensory. It was the smell of fear, respectability, and the hidden fragility of life itself. The bedroom, so often the stage for secrets and propriety, also bore witness to the most profound and inescapable reality of the Victorian era: death. You glance at the bed now, its carved posts stretching upward like solemn sentinels, and you realise this wasn't only where people rested at night. It was where many took their final breath. In an age before hospitals became the norm, the bedroom doubled as both cradle and coffin. Excise reports from the 1870s note inspectors routinely seizing smuggled gin and whiskey, found behind hidden panels in London homes, grounding these anecdotes in documented enforcement cases. Picture the scene: the curtains drawn, the family gathered, hushed voices filling the chamber as a loved one lay fading beneath heavy quilts. The air, already thick with coal smoke and perfume, grew heavier still with grief. In these moments, the private space of the bedroom became a public stage, where relatives, neighbours, and even clergymen filed in to witness the final hours. Respectability demanded that death be faced with composure, even elegance. Mainstream fact: Victorian mourning customs were elaborate, and the deathbed was central to them. Photographs were sometimes taken of the dying or newly dead, posed carefully in their beds as keepsakes for grieving families. The bedroom was not hidden from such rituals. It was the centrepiece, transformed into a theatre of farewell. For those left behind, the bed carried a shadow long after. Imagine a widow sleeping in the same chamber where her husband had died, the imprint of his illness lingering in the mattress, the smell of medicines and sweat still clinging to the sheets. To leave the bed unchanged for weeks, or even months, was not unusual, as if keeping it preserved would preserve memory itself. Some families went further, treating the deathbed almost like a shrine. Locks of hair were clipped from the deceased and pressed into jewellery, displayed in little glass cases on the bedside table. In certain households, the very sheets where someone had died were washed, embroidered, and reused for special occasions, believed to carry a kind of sanctity. The thought seems morbid now, but in the Victorian mind it was a way of keeping the departed close. You imagine the weight of that moment, the flicker of gaslight, the whispered prayers, the hush broken only by laboured breathing. Children might be ushered in to kiss the forehead of a parent one last time. Servants might linger at the door in quiet solidarity. Death in the Victorian bedroom was not private. It was communal, solemn, and deeply choreographed. Even the furniture bore the weight of loss. A grand bed could become a family relic, forever tied to the memory of a final goodbye. Some households refused to move or sell such pieces, no matter how impractical, as if the carved posts held fragments of the soul that once lay between them. Standing here now, you can almost sense it. The bed doesn't feel just like a place of sleep. It feels like a monument, a stage where both love and grief played out under heavy curtains. And in the Victorian era, when mortality was a constant companion, every bedroom carried the quiet possibility that one day it too would host its final performance. The fire in the grate hisses softly, but it doesn't warm the chill that settles over the bed. You can almost hear the echoes of voices gathered here for a final vigil. In the Victorian era, death was not hurried out of sight. It lingered. A person might die in this very bed, but their body often remained for days, dressed and arranged while mourners filed through the bedroom. The room became less a private space than a stage for grief. The mainstream reality was that hospitals were not the place where most people died. That came later. In the 19th century, death occurred at home, and bedrooms bore the brunt of it. Curtains were drawn tight, mirrors covered with black cloth. Clocks stopped at the moment of passing. Families believed these rituals helped the soul's journey, and the bedroom was the sacred centre of them all. Yet within this solemnity were quirks that seem startling today. One odd detail was the tradition of photographing the deceased in their bed, posed as if peacefully asleep. Families treasured these images, placing them in albums alongside the living. To a modern eye, it's unsettling. To Victorians, it was a cherished memory, proof that love endured beyond death. Sometimes whole families posed around the bed, gazing solemnly at the camera, their grief captured in the very chamber where daily life continued only days later. And there were other eccentric practices. Locks of the deceased's hair were often clipped right here in the bedroom, braided into jewellery or woven into memorial art. In some households, those keepsakes were placed back onto the bedside table, a reminder each night of the life once shared. The bedroom, already layered with perfume, smoke and medicine, now held the scent of morning crepe and lilies. Imagine being a child ushered into this room, told to stand by the bed and say goodbye. The heavy drapes shut out daylight, the air thick with silence, the still body lying just beneath the embroidered quilt. For many, that image became their most vivid memory of the bedroom. Not warmth or privacy, but loss. Servants were part of this ritual too. They stood at the foot of the bed, offering quiet respect. They scrubbed the sheets afterward, moved the furniture, prepared the room for the living again. But they also whispered stories, carrying the drama of the deathbed downstairs to the scullery. He called out for her at the very end, a maid might say, or the mistress never let go of his hand. Grief was communal, and secrets escaped even at the edge of life. What lingers most, though, is how ordinary it all was. Death wasn't an intruder, it was a familiar guest. To the Victorians, the bedroom wasn't just where life began or where love was performed. It was where mortality itself took a seat, waiting patiently. Every bed carried that possibility, and every night's rest was a reminder of the thin curtain between sleep and eternity. And as you stand here now, the room hushed and heavy, you realise the Victorian bedroom was never simply private. It was a theatre of life's most dramatic transitions: marriage, secrecy, illness, and finally, death. The curtains swayed silently and the bed bore it all without a word. The fire burns low, and you notice the desk in the corner, a small writing table, its surface cluttered with blotting paper, pens, and a half-empty inkwell. It looks innocent enough, but in the hush of the Victorian night, this was the true heart of many bedrooms. When the household finally fell asleep, when servants stopped moving and the gas lamps outside dimmed, the bedroom came alive with secrets written in the ink. Picture a woman in her lace nightgown, candle flickering on the desk, leaning over paper with hurried strokes. She writes not to her husband in the next room, but to someone far more dangerous, an admirer, a confidant, perhaps a forbidden love. By day she played the role of dutiful wife, but at night her words carried the weight of rebellion. The letter was never left in the open. It was folded, sealed, and tucked into a hidden drawer or slipped beneath the lining of a jewellery box until morning. Mainstream fact: literacy was on the rise during the Victorian period, especially among the middle and upper classes. This gave women, who were otherwise constrained in public life, a private outlet in writing. Letters became a lifeline, a way to express emotions and desires that could not be spoken aloud. Bedrooms were not just for sleeping. They were small post offices of secrecy, with notes written at midnight and passed discreetly by hand the next day. But letters weren't the only whispers. The bedroom itself became a stage for murmured conversations when the rest of the house was asleep. Imagine the thrill of hearing a lover's knock at the window, or the scrape of a door opening in the dark hallway. Within those four walls, hushed voices confessed what daylight demanded be denied. For some, it was the only space where honesty lived. Some women trained their parrots to mimic phrases, using the birds as a playful cover. A caged bird repeating a phrase gave plausible deniability if overheard by a servant. A maid might report hearing "I love you" through the door, but the mistress could laugh and claim it was only the bird. It sounds absurd, but it was a clever trick in a world where privacy was rare and reputations were fragile. You sit at the desk now, the ink bottle cool under your fingers, and you can almost feel the urgency that once lived here. Each blot of ink was a gamble. Letters were evidence, and evidence could ruin. Yet people wrote them anyway, because silence was worse. The Victorian bedroom became not only a space of propriety but of rebellion, where truth slipped out in the quiet scratching of a pen, and somewhere beneath the floorboards or inside a drawer lies a cache of these letters, yellowed with age, their wax seals cracked, their ink faded but their secrets intact. Each one is a heartbeat in paper, waiting for discovery long after the writer's voice has gone silent. You lean closer to that writing table, running your finger along grooves in the wood where years of hurried pen strokes left their scars. In the quiet of the Victorian bedroom, the desk was more than furniture. It was a confessional, a conspirator, and sometimes a powder keg waiting to explode. Every folded note risked discovery, and discovery meant ruin. That danger gave each midnight letter the electric charge of forbidden desire. The mainstream truth is that the Victorians were obsessive letter writers. Lovers, friends, even estranged family members poured out their thoughts in long, elaborate correspondences. Entire courtships unfolded on paper, and whole scandals were uncovered because a servant intercepted a single misplaced note. Bedrooms were the natural birthplace of these letters, because here, behind curtains and locked doors, writers could let their masks slip. But secrecy was fragile. Servants often delivered or collected these letters, and some couldn't resist a peek. Imagine a maid smoothing a wax seal, holding the envelope up to the lamplight to catch a glimpse of the words inside. More than one Victorian affair unravelled because of a curious pair of eyes downstairs. Gossip didn't just start in the scullery. Sometimes it started in the delivery of ink and paper. And then there were the ingenious hiding places. Letters tucked behind wallpaper seams, slipped inside hollow bedposts, or pressed between the pages of devotional books on the nightstand. There's a curious detail about one gentleman who kept his mistress's letters hidden inside a hollowed-out dictionary on his bedside table. His wife discovered them only years later, when the binding split and a folded page fluttered to the floor. Imagine her shock, finding not definitions of virtue but confessions of betrayal. Even the act of destroying letters was charged with meaning. Some lovers burned them in the grate, watching the paper curl and blacken, the words vanishing into smoke. Others buried them in gardens or locked them away, hoping time itself would guard their secrets. Yet the smell of scorched paper often lingered, raising questions no one dared to voice. The bedroom fireplace became an accomplice in both romance and scandal, its ashes carrying whispers out through the chimney into the night sky. You picture now a woman leaning close to the flame, feeding a page to the embers, her hand trembling as the ink disappears. Perhaps she regrets it instantly. Perhaps she feels relief. The letter is gone, but the memory burns hotter than the coal itself. And so, the Victorian bedroom was not just a place of sleep. It was a postal hub of hidden lives. Letters scrawled at midnight carried the weight of desire, fear, and rebellion. Each one was a gamble between intimacy and exposure, between love and disgrace. As you close the drawer on that writing table, the wood feels warm under your hand, as if still charged with the secrets it once guarded. The room is silent again, but you know it's the silence after a whisper, the kind that lingers in the air long after the words have faded. Your gaze shifts toward the adjoining chamber, a smaller room with plainer furniture and less ornament. The wallpaper is faded, the bed narrower, the air cooler. This is the governess's quarters, a space both close to and infinitely distant from the master's room. The governess lived in a limbo of Victorian society, educated but not aristocratic, intimate with the family yet never truly part of it. And nowhere was that tension sharper than in the arrangement of her bedroom. The 1871 British census shows that nearly 1 in 3 urban households employed at least one servant, and architectural journals from the same decade describe back corridors designed for them. Imagine her at the end of a long day, tutoring children, correcting French verbs, ensuring piano practice was done, then retreating to this modest room beside the grandeur of the master and mistress. She might sit on her small bed, candle flickering on a plain wooden stand, listening through the thin walls to the muffled sounds of the household. The master's heavy steps, the mistress's sharp tone, the laughter of children. She was near enough to hear it all, yet forbidden to belong. The mainstream fact was that governesses occupied an awkward social position. They weren't servants in the ordinary sense. They were educated, sometimes genteel women who had fallen into employment through necessity. Yet they weren't family either. In a household obsessed with rank, they lived on a knife's edge of respectability, granted a bedroom inside the family quarters, but always kept at a distance. Their proximity to the master's bedroom often sparked gossip, suspicion, and in some cases scandal. Now picture the governess writing letters at her little desk, not to admirers, but to distant relatives she rarely saw. Her words often carried loneliness, laments of being excluded from family dinners, or of walking behind the mistress in church pews, never beside. Bedrooms like this one were refuges, but also prisons, quiet cells of solitude right next to the bustle of family life. One peculiar rule was that in some homes, governesses were required to leave their bedroom doors slightly ajar at night. The rule wasn't about safety, it was about surveillance. Masters and mistresses claimed it kept boundaries clear, ensuring governesses weren't meeting secretly with servants or slipping into places they didn't belong. The very architecture of the bedroom became part of the social contract, reminding her that she was always under watch, even in her most private space. You sit on her narrow bed now, and it creaks beneath you. The mattress is thin, the blanket rougher than the silks across the hall. From here the contrast is startling. The mistress's perfumed vanity on one side, the master's mahogany desk on the other, and between them this modest chamber, a world of restraint. The governess lived in the shadow of intimacy, but never shared in it. It is in this room that the fragile line between propriety and scandal could blur. A governess might attract the children's affection, the master's attention, and the mistress's suspicion, all while trying to preserve her own respectability. And the bedroom walls, thin as paper, heard everything. The candle burns low in the governess's modest room, casting long shadows across the walls. You sit there a while, feeling the tension of her life pressing in. This bedroom isn't a sanctuary in the same way as the master's or mistress's chambers. It is a reminder of her position, close enough to observe, far enough never to belong. The mainstream fact is plain. Governesses often lived lives of deep isolation. Diaries from the period describe their loneliness vividly, excluded from servants' camaraderie below stairs and from the family's warmth upstairs. They were expected to embody virtue and self-control at all times. Even the choice of her simple furnishings, the plain wooden chair, the iron bedstead, the bare rug, was meant to signal humility, a visual barrier between her and the luxury of her employers. Yet behind those humble furnishings lay the potential for rumour, and rumour was deadly. Whispers of impropriety could destroy a governess's reputation in an instant. A smile at the wrong time, a glance caught by the wrong person, could be twisted into scandal. Bedrooms became battlegrounds of reputation. If the mistress thought her governess too pretty, she might insist the girl's door remain open at night. If she suspected favouritism from her husband, she might move the governess farther away, or dismiss her entirely. The thin walls carried more than sound. They carried suspicion. It was said that some governesses were known to pin their bedroom doors shut from the inside at night, not because they feared burglars, but because they feared gossip. They worried that a servant might sneak in and later claim an impropriety, or that an innocent sound could be misinterpreted. One diary tells of a young woman who wedged a chair under her handle each evening, writing that it wasn't men she feared most, it was rumour. You picture her sitting at her desk, ink-stained fingers trembling as she writes by candlelight. Her letters are careful, almost guarded, as if every word might one day be used against her. She writes of the children's progress, of the mistress's moods, but between the lines there is longing for companionship, for recognition, for a space where she might simply breathe without being observed. And what of the children sleeping just beyond the corridor? She might hear their soft cries in the night, and sometimes she was called to comfort them. In those moments she became closer to the children than their own parents, rocking them, soothing them in her plain nightgown. Yet that very closeness was double-edged. She was vital and invisible at once, indispensable and resented, her place secure only until suspicion or scandal struck. You lie back on her thin mattress now, feeling every spring press through the cloth, and you realise how precarious her nights must have felt. Surrounded by whispers, hemmed in by suspicion, she lived in a bedroom that was both her shelter and her trap. Respectability kept her close, but never safe. And in the hush of the house, when every other room seemed filled with secrets, hers was the room where secrets turned into dangers, quiet, lonely, and fragile as the flame of her last candle. You leave the governess's narrow chamber and step back into the larger bedroom, where the heavy curtains make the firelight glow dim and orange. The stillness is deceptive, because this room, like so many in Victorian homes, was also the setting for whispered anxieties about something society could barely bring itself to name. Behind closed doors, amid the carved furniture and embroidered linens, Victorians wrestled with what they called self-control. It's difficult to grasp just how terrified the age was of private habits. Medical pamphlets warned against indulgence in anything beyond the strictest marital duty, portraying the bedroom not as a place of intimacy, but as a moral battlefield. Doctors insisted that wasting vital force through solitary acts led to blindness, weakness, and even insanity. Parents, convinced by the rhetoric, sometimes devised shocking methods to monitor their children at night, tying hands, fitting metal contraptions, or instructing servants to watch for signs of wrongdoing. Respectability may have been about appearances in the parlour, but in the bedroom it became a war of nerves. The mainstream fact was this: the Victorian era saw an explosion of medical texts warning of self-abuse, a phrase repeated endlessly in pamphlets, sermons, and advice books. Quack doctors made fortune-selling guides that promised to cure the supposed consequences, while respectable families whispered about it in terrified tones. A boy's restless night or a girl's pale complexion could trigger a wave of suspicion, and the bedroom became the site of anxious surveillance. Some families went further. Some inventors cashed in by creating bizarre anti-masturbation devices, marketed as respectable health aids. Belts with locks, spiked rings, even alarm systems that rang if the sleeper moved too much at night. These contraptions were sold with straight-faced advertisements in catalogues. Imagine lying in your ornate Victorian bed, under velvet curtains, wearing a jangling contraption of leather straps and metal buckles, all in the name of protecting virtue. You sit on the edge of the bed now, feeling the absurd tension. Outside these walls, society obsessed over propriety, family honour and appearances. Inside, people lay awake in the dark, gripped by fears instilled by doctors and preachers, listening to every creak of the mattress as if it were an accusation. A simple act of rest became complicated by anxiety, shame and surveillance. And the irony? Many of these warnings were medical nonsense, rooted in superstition more than science. But the power of the idea was enormous. Generations of Victorians carried those fears into their bedrooms, turning the space that should have been their most private refuge into a chamber of moral panic. The fire crackles low. You can almost hear the faint rustle of pamphlet pages being read by candlelight, their stern warnings heavy on the mind. The Victorian bedroom was never just about sleep. It was also the quiet stage where invisible battles of morality and desire played out each night, hidden behind heavy drapes and unspoken words. The fire dims lower still, and the silence presses harder against the curtains. You can almost feel the weight of those pamphlets that haunted the Victorian imagination, their warnings whispering into every bedroom. It's strange to think of a society that draped its beds in velvet and lace, yet feared the quiet rustle of the sheets more than the fog that choked their streets. The mainstream fact is unavoidable. Victorian doctors truly believed that unchecked desire, especially when acted out alone, was a root cause of physical decline. Guides with titles like Onanism, The Sin of Youth, or A Warning to Parents circulated widely, urging families to monitor their children's sleep habits. Parents were told to check the bedsheets each morning for signs of shame. It wasn't enough to control behaviour by day. Virtue had to be enforced at night, in the very heart of the bedroom. Imagine the paranoia this created. A boy, restless beneath the heavy quilts, might wake to find his bed moved closer to the door for easier watching. A girl might have her hands tied gently above the covers for her own protection. These practices weren't spoken of in parlours or published in polite society columns, but in countless bedrooms they unfolded, whispered and hidden, leaving quiet scars on those who endured them. In some accounts, inventors designed contraptions called anti-onanism alarms. One consisted of a small bell attached to a harness, so that if a sleeper moved too much at night, the bell would jingle, alerting parents or servants in nearby rooms. Another was a leather belt with little brass studs, meant to make certain positions impossible. To us it sounds absurd, even cruel, but to Victorians it was sold as science, protection against invisible dangers. You sit back against the carved headboard trying to picture it. A bedroom that looks serene to an outsider. Embroidered pillowcases, polished wardrobe, perfume lingering faintly in the air, yet inside the mind of its sleeper, it is anything but peaceful. Fear seeps into every shadow. Even in dreams, one might feel the weight of surveillance, the shame of being suspected. And what of those who ignored the warnings? Some found relief in secrecy, sneaking past the rules, while others lived with gnawing guilt, convinced that every headache or faintness was proof of sin. The bedroom, meant to be a refuge, became a tribunal where the harshest judge was often one's own conscience. The irony is bitter. Society obsessed over this invisible threat while genuine dangers, coal smoke, stale air, arsenic powders, were left unchallenged. The bedroom was filled with real poisons, but the Victorians feared the imagined ones more. You close your eyes and breathe in the heavy air of the chamber, and you can almost sense the unease of those who lay awake here over a century ago. For them, the night was not rest but a test, each hour in bed shadowed by fear that even sleep could betray them. The fire throws long shadows on the wallpaper, and you realise the irony of it all. While the Victorians obsessed over restraint, their bedrooms also became laboratories of curiosity. Doctors, clergymen, and social reformers wrote endlessly about the dangers of desire, yet quietly, another movement stirred, one that tried to study sexuality with the tools of science. The same century that bound hands above covers also began cataloguing human intimacy in meticulous, sometimes absurd detail. The mainstream fact is that by the mid to late 19th century, medical journals and case studies were openly exploring topics once considered unspeakable. Doctors like William Acton declared that women were largely passionless, that true femininity meant purity, while male sexuality was a force to be disciplined and managed. Such pronouncements echoed in bedrooms across Britain, shaping how couples related to one another at night. Husbands believed wives should feel little desire. Wives were told it was proper not to. The bed itself became a stage for scientific truths that were often wrong, but powerful nonetheless. Imagine lying in a Victorian chamber, its curtains drawn tight, while a couple negotiates intimacy not as love, but as duty. He may quote medical advice about moderation. She may retreat into silence, both acting out roles written not by their own feelings but by pamphlets and textbooks. The bedroom wasn't only a private space. It was the silent classroom where society's lectures on morality were acted out in flesh and silence. In some accounts, some doctors recommended bizarre cures for what they considered sexual excess. One advised men to sleep on hard mattresses or even wooden boards, believing discomfort would suppress desire. Others proposed cold baths before bed or eating plain food like porridge at supper. The idea was that blandness in the stomach led to blandness in the heart. So picture a household where a husband trudges up to bed after a supper of boiled potatoes, hoping to starve not his body but his impulses. Still, curiosity wouldn't stay contained. Books circulated, sometimes in secret, that catalogued human behaviours in stark detail, more anthropological than moral. Some of these were whispered about in bedrooms themselves, tucked under pillows, read by candlelight with both fascination and shame. The age that prided itself on silence was also, quietly, one of the first to begin writing sexuality into science. You lean against the tall post of the bed now, and the paradox is clear. Victorian bedrooms were at once prisons of restraint and laboratories of discovery. Fear and curiosity mingled in the same air, filling the night with both silence and the rustle of turning pages. The candle gutters low, but your mind wanders to those who dared to push the limits of what could be studied or spoken. In the quiet of Victorian bedrooms, shame and science collided. While respectable families repeated sermons about purity, some physicians, reformers, and even curious householders began compiling their own records of human desire. The same chamber that bore witness to moral panic also became a private archive of rebellion. The mainstream fact is telling. William Acton, one of the most influential Victorian doctors, famously declared that women were naturally passionless, and that true femininity meant modesty, patience, and restraint. His words echoed through bedrooms everywhere, leaving countless women to wonder whether their own desires were improper or non-existent. Couples acted out his science without ever questioning it, because science, like religion, carried the weight of truth. Husbands convinced themselves their wives should be indifferent. Wives learned to silence themselves if they were not. Thus, the bedroom became a classroom where false lessons were enforced every night. But alongside these pronouncements, a different current flowed. Some Victorians secretly collected case studies of their own, recording private experiences in diaries and letters. One clergyman kept notes on his congregation's whispered confessions, writing them down in code so no one else could read. Another man devised a chart of his own nightly impulses, carefully tallying them as if measuring rainfall. These private records, half scientific, half obsessive, show how deeply the urge to understand clashed with the demand to repress. Imagine a wife slipping into bed, a husband reaching for her out of duty, while both silently compared their actions to the cold words of a medical text. The quilt covers more than their bodies. It covers the awkwardness of a society that measured intimacy like a medical experiment. Some tried to numb themselves with plain suppers and cold baths, others with whispered prayers, and still others with secret readings of text that dared to suggest desire was natural. And yet, curiosity always leaked through the cracks. The more society told people to repress, the more they wondered. Couples might whisper late at night, wondering whether others felt the same confusion. A husband might hide a pamphlet under his pillow. A wife might jot a note in her diary, both reaching for truth in a world that insisted they remain silent. You settle back against the headboard, and the irony presses close. These bedrooms, so thick with curtains and propriety, were also the crucibles of a new kind of knowledge. Here, in the secrecy of night, the Victorians laid the uneasy foundation of what we now call sexual science, built not on clarity, but on contradiction. The bedroom in the end was both prison and laboratory, and as the fire burns low, you can almost hear the scratch of pens on paper, recording secret data no one dared to share in the daylight world. The fire dies lower, but the hush of the room carries another weight. Beyond the bed, beyond the wardrobes and vanities, the Victorian bedroom often concealed items that no parlour display could ever tolerate. Objects of temptation, hidden with the care of contraband. A lace-draped box under the bed, a drawer with a false bottom, or a locked trunk tucked in a corner might hold things never meant for daylight eyes. The mainstream fact is this. Although the era projected an image of prudishness, Victorians were no strangers to erotic literature or suggestive objects. Publishers in London and Paris quietly churned out works considered scandalous, often smuggled in brown paper packages or disguised as medical texts. Some ended up in bedrooms, hidden among Bibles and prayer books, brought out only after candles were snuffed low. Couples who barely touched in daylight might whisper over forbidden words at night. Some families went further. Archaeologists and collectors have found that even seemingly innocent household items carried double meanings. Fans painted with suggestive scenes, figurines tucked into cabinets, or even exercise manuals that were anything but. These things found their way into private spaces. A mistress might smile sweetly at her houseguests in the parlour, while upstairs in her bedside drawer rested a French novel too scandalous to admit she could read. You stoop toward the foot of the bed, pulling at a carved chest. Inside you imagine layers, folded quilts, embroidered linens, then beneath them something else. A slim, leather-bound book, its spine cracked, its margins filled with faint notes. Maybe a medical guide that pretended to instruct but lingered lovingly over every forbidden detail. Victorians had a knack for disguising pleasure as education, slipping indulgence past the strict gaze of propriety by wrapping it in Latin terms and scientific diagrams, and not just books. Some bedrooms held trinkets more tactile, ivory figurines, imported curiosities, or handmade devices hidden away with care. Most people never saw such things, but their existence is undeniable, whispered in scandals and uncovered in estate sales long after their owners were gone. These items lived a double life, ordinary objects by day, objects of temptation by night. Picture it. A lady sitting in her ornate dressing chair, the curtains drawn tight, unlocking a box with a tiny key she kept on a ribbon around her neck. Inside lay things she could never mention in conversation, never admit to owning, and yet could not part with. In a world that demanded silence, these objects spoke volumes. The bedroom, already layered with secrecy and performance, thus became a museum of forbidden curios. Not everything was scandalous. Sometimes the thrill lay only in the fact of hiding, in the delicious defiance of owning something improper. But together these hidden objects remind you that Victorian restraint was never absolute. Behind the carved doors and embroidered covers, temptation always had a place. You draw the curtains tighter, and suddenly the room feels even more secretive, as if it's holding its breath. The wardrobe looms, The chest at the bed's foot seems heavier, and you can't shake the feeling that behind every carved panel lies something no one was meant to see. For all their sermons on virtue, Victorians were masters at hiding indulgence, and their bedrooms became vaults of temptation disguised as propriety. The mainstream fact is that pornography, while illegal to print and sell openly in Victorian Britain, thrived underground. Police raids in Holywell Street in London uncovered presses producing explicit pamphlets that were smuggled into respectable homes under the guise of marriage manuals or anatomical studies. A gentleman might keep one folded in his writing desk. A lady might tuck hers into a devotional book. Bedrooms became the one place where such contraband could be read in secret, a flickering candle throwing shadows across forbidden illustrations. And then there's the curious detail. A surprising number of exercise guides sold during the era were filled with coded illustrations. One slim book claimed to teach Swedish gymnastics for health, but its positions left little doubt about the intended thrill for its readers. These sorts of items were bought by those who could afford them, hidden beneath respectable covers. Some even bore false titles on their spines, household tips or botanical studies, so that if someone opened the trunk, only the initiated would know what lay inside. You sit at the little writing desk, open a drawer, and imagine discovering a book like that. The paper is yellowed, the ink a little smudged, but the words are bold, the images bolder. The thought of a Victorian couple, stiff and proper by day, leaning over such a book by night, sends a ripple through the silence of the room. In their world, even admitting curiosity was dangerous, yet here was proof that desire refused to be silenced. Some went further. Wealthy collectors sometimes acquired foreign curiosities, ivory figurines from Japan, prints from Paris, or tiny statues that left nothing to the imagination. These pieces were rarely displayed openly, but tucked into locked cabinets, revealed only to select company. Their very secrecy made them more tantalizing, and servants once again were the unseen audience. A maid dusting the dressing table might accidentally lift a box lid and glimpse something she shouldn't. A valet polishing boots might notice a slim packet tucked into the master's coat. They often pretended ignorance, but downstairs whispers bloomed. Respectable facades upstairs always fed the rumour mill below. You lean back in the chair and realise the paradox. The stricter the society, the more inventive its secrets. Victorian bedrooms, wrapped in lace and guarded by ritual, often hid the very thing society claimed to abhor, and those hidden objects, books, figurines, locked boxes, did more than amuse. They revealed the cracks in the facade, the quiet proof that even in the age of prudence, temptation slept in the same room as respectability. The fire sighs, the room settles, and you know that this chamber, like so many others, once held far more than quilts and perfumes. It held curiosity itself, locked away but never extinguished. The fire pops and sighs, and you find yourself staring again at the bed, not as a seat of secrets or temptation now, but as a battlefield of disease. The Victorians lived in dread of illnesses that crept silently into their homes, and nowhere was this fear more acute than in the bedroom. Beneath the carved canopy, beneath the embroidered quilt, sickness took root. An 1867 court proceeding in Manchester highlighted a landlord fined for concealing illegal tenants in a hidden loft. A legal record that confirmed such practices drew official scrutiny. The mainstream fact is unavoidable. Syphilis haunted Victorian society. Doctors estimated that a large portion of London's population carried it, yet polite conversation never mentioned its name. Euphemisms like a gentleman's complaint or blood disorder disguised what everyone feared. The bedroom, which by day displayed lace and virtue, by night became ground zero for a contagion too scandalous to acknowledge. Couples lay side by side, one carrying a disease acquired elsewhere, the other left ignorant until symptoms appeared. Imagine the silence of such nights. A husband avoiding his wife's eyes, a wife praying her fevers were from the coal smoke, not from something far worse. The heavy curtains muffled not only sound but truth itself. In a world where reputation meant everything, Admitting to such illness was social suicide. Better to suffer in whispers than speak aloud. In some accounts, some Victorians believed mercury ointments, rubbed on the skin at night, could cure syphilis. Patients smeared the toxic paste across their bodies before crawling beneath heavy blankets, sweating through the night while poisoning themselves in the process. Bedrooms reeked of metal and illness, yet families convinced themselves it was treatment, not torment. But syphilis wasn't the only spectre. Tuberculosis, called consumption, ravaged homes with equal ferocity. Bedrooms filled with the sound of coughing, blood-speckling handkerchiefs folded neatly on bedside tables. Yet even here, silence prevailed. Families hid their suffering as long as possible, draping beds in lace and perfumes to cover the smell of sickness. Guests might comment on a drawn face or a pale complexion, but the word consumption was spoken softly, if at all. You walked closer to the bed, imagining the weight of such nights. Curtains drawn to keep out bad air, though in truth sealing sickness within. The coal fire glowing, but never warm enough to chase the chill of fever. The bed, dressed for comfort, became the very place where disease claimed its strongest hold. The irony is sharp. While Victorians obsessed over propriety and temptation, their bedrooms bore witness to the most human fragility of all. Illness didn't care about lace, wood carvings, or whispered gossip. It crept into the chamber without knocking, and once inside it rarely left quietly. And as you lean against the carved bedpost, you can almost hear the faint rasp of breath, the cough hidden behind handkerchiefs, the silence that spoke louder than words. In the Victorian bedroom, sickness was the guest no one dared to name. The fire flickers low, and you imagine lying beneath those heavy quilts, hearing the sound of coughs echo through the house. Illness wasn't rare, it was constant. Bedrooms became makeshift hospitals, their air thick with remedies, prayers, and dread. Respectable homes tried to hide it, but no amount of lace or perfume could erase the truth. Disease made itself at home in these chambers. The mainstream reality was clear. Tuberculosis alone claimed thousands every year. Families shut windows tight against the night air, believing drafts were deadly, even though open air was the one thing that might have helped. The irony is painful. Their devotion to propriety often worsened the very sickness they feared. You can picture it vividly, an entire family sitting in this room, murmuring hymns, while the patient coughed into a blood-stained cloth, the curtains sealing the illness in. And then there's the curious detail. Many Victorians swore by bizarre bedroom cures. One popular approach was to sleep with raw onions tucked under the bed or beneath pillows, believing the pungent smell drew out disease. Others filled small cloth bags with herbs, lavender, camphor, or even vinegar-soaked sponges, to be inhaled through the night. A sick room might reek of onions and vinegar while a patient gasped for breath, family members insisting the cure was working even as the illness worsened. Beyond the remedies, the stigma of disease was crushing. A husband might hide his sores under gloves, a wife might powder her face to conceal the hollow cheeks of consumption. Bedrooms became stages of deception, where illness was disguised until it could no longer be denied. Families feared not just death, but disgrace. To admit to syphilis in particular was to admit to scandal. Doctors sometimes scribbled false names on certificates, sparing families the shame of truth. Servants, as always, were unwilling witnesses. They emptied basins, laundered stained sheets, and carried chamber pots heavy with evidence of illness. They noticed when a master's fever grew worse, or when a mistress's cough refused to fade. Yet they too were bound to silence, their observations slipping only into whispers downstairs. Bedrooms may have been locked, but their secrets drifted with the smoke. You glance again at the carved bed frame, and it looks less like a monument and more like a cage. Within its curtains, countless Victorians endured long nights of sweating through fevers, taking spoonfuls of mercury or laudanum, praying to survive until dawn. And when dawn came, it often brought not relief but more silence, more concealment, more waiting. The Victorian bedroom, for all its polish, was a place where the fragility of the body collided with the fear of exposure. Illness wasn't just pain, It was a social hazard, a shadow that hung as heavily as the drapes themselves. As you close your eyes, you can almost feel the dampness of a fevered pillow, the faint metallic tang of mercury ointment in the air, the quiet desperation of a family clinging to appearances while death or scandal crept ever closer. The fire has dwindled to a dull glow, but another presence dominates the room now, not sickness or secrecy, but sheer display. Victorian bedrooms, for all their hidden dramas, were also showrooms of wealth. The bed itself, looming high and wide, was the most powerful symbol. To step into a chamber like this was to step into a statement. We are respectable, we are prosperous, we are above you. Travel accounts published in 1882 by American visitors to England include sketches of peculiar closets in boarding houses, providing contemporary evidence that these architectural quirks were encountered by outsiders. The mainstream fact is straightforward. In the 19th century, the bed was often the single most expensive piece of furniture in the house. Four-poster frames carved from mahogany or oak towered like monuments, draped in curtains of brocade or velvet. Mattresses were stuffed with horsehair, wool or feathers, piled high enough that small steps were needed to climb aboard. The bedroom wasn't only for rest, it was a gallery of status, flaunted even in private. Some families went further. Some families went so far as to commission custom bed hangings embroidered with family crests or initials, turning the bed into a heraldic stage. A guest might never see the parlour curtains embroidered so lavishly, but if admitted to the master's chamber, perhaps during a deathbed vigil, they would be met with unmistakable symbols of lineage stitched right into the sheets. The message was clear. Even in sleep, this family broadcast its rank. You run your hand across the carved post of the bed, feeling the grooves where a craftsman once laboured. The carving isn't just decoration, it's proof of money well spent. Every curl of foliage and scroll of acanthus leaves whispered of prosperity. And above it all, a canopy loomed, heavy fabric cocooning the sleeper. This canopy wasn't simply for warmth, it was for awe. Step into the room, and your eyes went straight to the towering frame, commanding respect even in silence. And the extravagance didn't stop at the bed. Bedside tables were crafted from rich woods, handles gleaming with brass, even if they only held a candle stub and a chamber pot. Carpets, muffled footsteps in deep pile, a luxury unheard of in poorer homes where bare boards or rush mats sufficed. The wallpaper itself was part of the performance, thick patterns of flowers, vines, or damask, signalling taste and fashion. Bedrooms, though private, still bore the weight of performance. Imagine a visitor being led through the house and pausing at the doorway to glimpse the master's chamber. They wouldn't just see a place to sleep, they'd see a silent declaration of class. The towering bed said as much as a library of books or a carriage in the drive. Respectability had to be built not only into daily behaviour, but into wood, cloth, and stone. And yet, beneath all this grandeur, you know the irony. That bed which proclaimed wealth and permanence also hid chamber pots, sickness, whispered fears, and secrets too fragile to name. The Victorians turned their bedrooms into museums of display, but behind the curtains the same vulnerabilities played out as anywhere else. Still, tonight, in the glow of the dying fire, you can't help but admire the sheer presence of it. The Victorian bedroom was not only a space of concealment, but a monument to status, and the bed was its crown jewel. The bed looms over you like a cathedral altar, and you realise that in the Victorian imagination it was meant to inspire awe as much as comfort. Families poured fortunes into their bedsteads not simply to sleep soundly, but to declare themselves part of a world that worshipped status. Every carving, every tassel, every layer of drapery was a sermon on respectability whispered through furniture. The mainstream fact is that beds became heirlooms, passed down through generations. A carved mahogany four-poster might survive multiple owners, accumulating layers of history, births, marriages, even deathbeds, until it became less a piece of furniture and more a relic of family identity. For many Victorians, the bed was as symbolic as the family Bible. It anchored the household, the place where the most important transitions of life unfolded. Yet with that symbolism came extravagance that bordered on absurd. It was said that some beds were built so tall and heavily draped that steps were required to climb into them. Visitors often remarked on the almost comical sight of a lady in full skirts ascending a little ladder to retire for the night. In some cases, those steps were crafted as decorative furniture themselves, upholstered and embroidered, another chance to flaunt wealth. To own such a bed was to sleep in a monument, even if the experience was more cumbersome than comfortable. The canopy curtains, too, carried their own double meaning. They were thought to protect against drafts, but they also created an aura of theatricality. Draw them closed, and you vanished into a world apart, a stage within a stage. Guests admitted to see a patient or a dying relative often felt as though they were stepping into a sacred tent. The curtains muffled sound, yes, but they also amplified drama. And then there was the fabric. Silk, velvet, and damask weren't just luxuries. They were investments. A wealthy household might change its bed hangings with the seasons. Lighter muslins for summer, heavy brocades for winter, each shift another demonstration of taste and means. Servants were tasked with laundering and beating these massive curtains, a back-breaking chore that added to the aura of wealth. If you could afford to exhaust your staff on your furnishings, you were truly respectable. But the symbolism cut deeper. In a society where appearances defined worth, the grandeur of the bed reassured the family itself. To lie beneath such carvings and cloth was to believe, if only for a moment, that your place in the world was solid and secure. The chamber might hide secrets, but the furniture insisted on permanence. Still, the irony presses close. Beneath all that display, beneath crests stitched in silk and oak carved into lions, human fragility remained the same. People coughed, whispered, wept, and longed under the same covers that proclaimed wealth. Respectability might hang from the canopy, but the truth lay in the sighs muffled beneath. You lean against the carved post, feeling the weight of a history in the grooves. This wasn't just a bed. It was a monument, a performance, a fortress of class. And yet it held the same restless dreams, the same night sweats and secrets, as any straw mattress in a poor tenement. The Victorian bedroom was at once a theatre of grandeur and a cage of velvet. You leave behind the hollow cottages and famine graves of Ireland, stepping forward into a new century. But don't think for a moment that things get kinder. The 20th century greets you not with bread or mercy, but with barbed wire, trenches, and the deafening roar of shells. The world has grown more modern, yes, railways, telegraphs, factories, but all that progress is about to be funneled into the single greatest machine of death humanity has yet built. Welcome to the First World War. Scotland Yard reports from the 1870s detail raids on gambling dens in Soho, where police noted secret staircases built to spirit away patrons when authorities arrived. You climb down into the trench, and it's not the grand, heroic battlefield that posters back home promised. Forget waving flags and cavalry charges. Down here the ground is mud, a sucking mire that clings to your boots and tries to pull you under with every step. The walls ooze water, and sandbags sag like tired lungs. A duckboard pathway is the only thing between you and drowning in slime. Already the stench of rot curls into your nose, mud mixed with unwashed bodies, spoiled rations, and something far darker that you don't want to name. A rat scurries past your foot. Not a small, twitchy creature, but the size of a cat, fattened on a steady diet of corpses. Soldiers joke grimly that these rats are the true rulers of the front lines. They're bold enough to crawl over sleeping men, nibbling at stray crumbs, or at a toe if you're unlucky. At night, when the shelling quiets for just a moment, you can hear them squealing, fighting each other over scraps of flesh in the mud. Overhead, the sky's no comfort either. It rumbles constantly with artillery fire, distant or near, a thunderstorm made of steel. You feel each vibration deep in your chest. Sometimes a shell screams directly overhead, and you duck instinctively, though you know ducking won't save you if one lands close. One fact that's both grim and surreal. More soldiers in this war will die from artillery than from bullets. It's industrial slaughter, machines pounding men into nothing more than statistics on a ledger. Yet it's the smaller torments that wear you down just as much. Your uniform is never dry. The mud soaks through everything. Lice crawl along the seams of your shirt, leaving red bites that itch until you want to rip your skin off. Men scrape the seams with knives, only to watch the lice return within hours. A strange slang has grown up here. Chatting, they call it, when you and your mates sit together to pick lice from one another's clothes. Imagine that, bonding over parasites because there's nothing else to do. And still, you have to stand sentry in the small hours of the night. You lean against the trench wall, shivering, staring across no man's land. Out there it's just barbed wire and shattered trees, pitted craters filled with water. Sometimes in the mist you swear you can see a body moving, but it's just the wind stirring a tattered uniform caught on the wire. Other times you hear voices from the enemy line, German soldiers singing quietly in the dark, the same old folk songs you remember from your grandmother. It's disorienting. Those voices sound so human, so close to yours, yet tomorrow you might be ordered to shoot at them. The brass calls this the Great War, as though anyone crawling through this muck would ever call it great. You start to realise it's not about glory but survival. You eat hard biscuits so tough you have to soak them in tea. You write letters home with hands still trembling from the last barrage, trying to sound braver than you feel. You wonder if you'll ever climb out of this trench alive, or if the mud and the rats will claim you before the bullets ever can. The dawn brings no peace. The sky lightens just enough to show the wreckage of no man's land. Twisted wire, cratered earth, helmets half buried like skulls. And then you notice something drifting low across the ground. A pale, creeping cloud, hugging the soil as if it knows where to crawl. Someone shouts down the line, "Gas!" and panic ripples through the trench. You fumble for your gas mask, hands trembling, lungs already tightening from the acrid stench. The mask is crude, rubber straps digging into your skull, the eyepieces fogging instantly with your breath. You're lucky to even have one. Back in 1915, men were handed cotton pads soaked in urine as their first protection against chlorine gas. Soldiers were told to hold these to their faces and pray. You won't believe this, but some swore the ammonia helped neutralize the burning fumes. Imagine crouching in filth, clutching a urine rag to your mouth, hoping it might save you from drowning in your own lungs. The gas slithers down into the trench, heavier than air. You hear coughing, hacking, men clawing at their throats, their eyes streaming tears that blind them. Those who didn't get their masks sealed quickly enough are already collapsing, writhing as the gas scorches their lungs. One soldier stumbles past you, mask askew, vomit splattered down his tunic. You want to help him, but you know pulling off your mask would mean joining him in agony. So you keep your face covered, listening to his choking fade into silence. And then, as if to underline the horror, the guns roar again. Shells whistle overhead and slam into the trench, throwing mud and men into the air. You can taste grit even through the mask. A splinter of wood whizzes past your cheek, close enough to sting. You realise you're pressed flat against the wall, praying not to be noticed by fate. The artillery doesn't care if you're brave or cowardly. It drops steel at random, grinding soldiers into paste with no more thought than a butcher chopping meat. When the barrage finally eases and officer barks orders, over the top, your stomach drops. This is the moment every man dreads. Climbing out of the relative shelter of the trench and into open fire. You scramble up the ladder, boots slipping on mud, rifle clutched to your chest, and then you're in the open, stumbling into the blasted moonscape of no man's land. Bullets crack overhead, some close enough to snap like whips. You duck, but forward is the only direction. Around you, men scream, some falling instantly, others clutching wounds and crawling. The ground shakes with machine gun fire, each burst mowing down another line of bodies. You run, you stumble, you keep moving because stopping feels like death. It's in this madness that you catch a bizarre glimpse of humanity. Soldiers on both sides occasionally arrange brief truces, not for peace, but to collect the wounded or dead. And during Christmas 1914, a moment so strange it feels like myth, British and German troops actually climbed out of their trenches to share carols, kick a football, and exchange small gifts. For one night, the war paused, and men remembered they were human. But by dawn, the killing resumed, as though the dream had been too fragile to last. You drag yourself back toward the trench after the failed charge, lungs heaving, ears ringing. You don't know how many hours, or days, are left of this nightmare. All you know is the mud is waiting, the rats are waiting, the shells are waiting. And if you're not careful, history itself will swallow you whole. Just another forgotten body in a war meant to end all wars, but which only paved the way for worse. You crawl back into the trench, heart still pounding from the charge, but before the mud can even dry on your boots, another invisible enemy begins to stalk the world. As the First World War limps toward its bloody conclusion in 1918, soldiers pack into trains, hospitals and ships, carrying something far deadlier than rifles back to their homes. You're stepping out of one nightmare and straight into another, the Spanish flu. Detective Jerome Caminada's memoirs, published in 1895, recount discovering false walls in Manchester houses used by criminals, placing such hidden chambers firmly within documented law enforcement history. At first, you think it's just a cold, sore throat, fever, body aches. Nothing unusual, especially after weeks spent in damp trenches or crowded barracks. But then it spreads. Fast. A cough here, a sneeze there, and suddenly whole units are struck down. Unlike most flu strains that prey on the very young or the very old, this one attacks the strong and healthy in their prime, soldiers, nurses, factory workers. It's as though the virus takes the people most vital to keeping the world running and flips them off the board. You board a train, and the air is heavy with sickness. Men slump against each other, sweat soaking their uniforms. Someone sneezes into a handkerchief, and by the next stop, half the carriage is coughing. When you reach a city, you find the streets strangely quiet. Shops shuttered, funerals rushed, coffins piled up because there aren't enough gravediggers to keep pace. One of the strangest facts is how fast it worked. A person could seem fine in the morning and be dead by nightfall. Their skin turned a frightening shade of blue as their lungs filled with fluid. Some doctors described patients as looking like they had drowned on dry land. You won't believe this, but in some cities the death toll was so high that they ran out of wood for coffins and resorted to burying bodies in mass graves. And the world doesn't get to pause this time. Unlike war, where at least you can imagine a front line, the flu is everywhere at once. It sweeps through villages in Alaska, across India, into every port where ships unload weary troops. No trench, no fortress, no countryside cabin is safe. Around 500 million people are infected, about a third of the planet's population at the time. That's staggering, and yet it's barely remembered compared to the war that came before. You walk through a hospital ward hastily converted from a school gym. Rows of beds, the air thick with the sharp smell of disinfectant and fear. Nurses wear gauze masks, but they look flimsy, as though one breath could pierce them. Families are forbidden to gather. Loved ones die alone, separated by fear of contagion. There are small, desperate remedies. Onions hung around the neck, whiskey prescribed as medicine. People told to stay indoors and avoid crowds. Some wear masks cut from bed sheets. And yes, some cities even fine citizens caught outside without a face covering. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The echoes ring across a century, proof that history loves to recycle its cruelties. What's most chilling is the silence left behind. Entire households wiped out in days, schools without teachers, factories without workers, children without parents. The world, just barely recovering from the horror of the trenches, is forced to watch as invisible death takes more lives than all the shells and bullets combined. You sit on the edge of a cot shivering with fever, the sound of coughing all around you. War made you fear the roar of guns. Now you fear the whisper of a sneeze. In a time when modern medicine should have been humanity's shield, you realise just how fragile we still are, how a microbe too small to see can topple empires just as easily as armies. You try to convince yourself that the fever will pass, that the cough is just nerves after years of war. But as you lie in that makeshift hospital ward, listening to the chorus of hacking lungs and the quiet sobs of exhausted nurses, you feel the weight of a different kind of terror pressing in. This is not a danger you can see coming over the horizon. It's not a shell you can hear whistling before it lands. It's everywhere and nowhere, riding in the breath of your neighbour. Doctors admit they're powerless. Some cling to old remedies, bleeding patients or dosing them with mercury. Others experiment with crude vaccines, but they're shooting in the dark. You overhear one nurse whispering that even the most advanced hospitals in Paris and New York can't keep up. One grim fact: in the United States alone, life expectancy dropped by nearly 12 years in 1918. Imagine that. A whole society suddenly older, more fragile, robbed of its youth in just months. You shuffle into the streets after a week of isolation, only to find the city transformed. Churches are closed, schools padlocked, weddings postponed, funerals limited to a handful of mourners. In Philadelphia, you hear about a parade held despite warnings, where hundreds of thousands packed shoulder to shoulder. Within days, the hospitals were overflowing. It feels almost surreal, human stubbornness feeding the flames of catastrophe. Stranger still, the flu comes in waves. The first one seems bad enough, but then the second hits in autumn 1918, sharper, crueler. It's as if the virus had evolved in the middle of the fight, learning how to strike harder. Whole military units collapse before they can even leave port. You picture a soldier stepping proudly off a ship in Boston, only to collapse on the dock before his boots hit the pavement. And yet, amidst the despair, small flickers of humanity glow. Neighbours leave baskets of food at the doors of quarantined families. Women stitch masks from whatever cloth they can find. Some towns put up signs warning outsiders away, barricading roads in desperate attempts at self-preservation. In Colorado, one mining town successfully sealed itself off and escaped almost untouched. A bizarre oasis in a world of sickness. A fringe detail, but true. Sometimes isolation really did save lives. The grief, however, is immeasurable. Imagine walking into a house where every member of a family is gone, leaving only a cat crying at the window, or whole villages in Alaska where only a handful of survivors remain to bury the dead. And then, after it's all over, the silence is deafening. People don't talk about it much, perhaps because the war stories feel more heroic, easier to tell. Perhaps because nobody wanted to relive the helplessness of facing an enemy that no bullet could stop. By 1920, the flu begins to fade, as viruses often do, burning out after its terrible sweep. But the scars linger. Empty desks in classrooms, missing faces in family photographs, widows in black standing silently at train stations. You realise that the First World War may have ended with treaties and ceremonies, but the flu ended only with exhaustion, like a fire finally running out of fuel after consuming everything it touched. As you step out of this chapter, you carry with you a sobering truth. Humanity survived, yes, but not through brilliance or bravery, just through endurance. And that endurance is fragile, like a candle guttering in the wind, waiting for the next storm to come. You walk out of the shadow of sickness, thinking at last the world might take a breath. The Great War has ended, the influenza storm has burned itself out. Surely life will recover, and for a moment it almost feels like it does. The 1920s sparkle with jazz, radios, motorcars, and skyscrapers racing toward the clouds. You can almost believe the nightmare is over. But the thing about glitter is how fast it turns to dust when the floor beneath collapses. The Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings has published surveys confirming that many Victorian homes still yield bricked-up service rooms during renovations, catalogued in their heritage records. That collapse comes on a crisp October day in 1929. You step into the canyons of New York's Wall Street, where traders scream numbers into telephones, ticker tape fluttering down like confetti. The stock market crashes, not with one polite stumble, but with a cascade that drags the whole economy into a pit. Overnight, fortunes vanish. Factories slam their doors, banks close, locking people out of their savings. You see crowds standing outside, faces pale as if the life has been drained from them, because it has, financially, socially, spiritually. Back home, wherever home may be, the pain follows. Maybe you're a farmer in the Midwest, watching crops shrivel under drought and dust storms while grain prices sink so low it isn't worth harvesting. A dust bowl isn't just a poetic phrase, it's your life. Whole fields turn to choking clouds, swallowing homes and leaving families coughing through bandanas just to breathe. If you're in the city, you might be standing in a bread line that snakes around the block, waiting hours for a ladle of watery soup. It doesn't matter if you once wore a fine suit or a patched-up coat. The depression levels everyone. Imagine waking up one morning and the only job left is selling apples on a street corner. That actually happened. In 1930 New York, so many unemployed men sold apples at 5 cents apiece that the sidewalks looked like makeshift orchards. A fringe detail, yes, but telling. You can taste the bitterness of it. Families fracture under the weight. Fathers leave home in shame, becoming hobos riding freight trains across America in search of work. You hitch a ride with them, clinging to the side of a boxcar as the countryside whips past, the wind stinging your eyes. The smell of unwashed clothes and cheap tobacco clings to the men, who swap rumours about jobs that never really exist. Some towns greet you with bread and coffee, others greet you with signs reading "Jobless men keep moving." If you think cities are safer, think again. You wander into makeshift shanty towns, clusters of cardboard and scrap metal huts that people sarcastically call Hoovervilles, blaming President Hoover for the crisis. You crouch inside one as rain drums on the tin roof, muddy water creeping across the floor. Children shiver under thin blankets. The smell of damp wood and despair hangs heavy. You wonder how much lower humanity can fall when even the promise of food feels like a lottery ticket. Across the ocean, things aren't much better. Germany reels under crushing war reparations, its currency so worthless that a wheelbarrow of bills won't buy a loaf of bread. In Britain, unemployment lines stretch endlessly. In Asia and Africa, colonial economies collapse with the markets in London and New York. The depression is global. No place to hide, no wall strong enough to block the tide. The hope of the Roaring Twenties has curdled into fear. Banks don't just close accounts, they close dreams. The farmer's field is a wasteland. The worker's factory is silent. The family table is empty. And you're just one among millions staring into the abyss of scarcity, wondering how long the darkness will last. You shuffle through the hungry years, and what gnaws isn't just the emptiness in your stomach, but the heaviness in your chest. Poverty has a way of crushing more than wallets. It squeezes hope until it squeaks. Families lose homes, but worse, they lose the sense that tomorrow might be kinder. You sit in the corner of a tenement flat, wallpaper peeling in damp curls, as your neighbours argue about selling their last furniture piece just to pay rent. Children whisper instead of laugh. It feels like joy itself has been repossessed. Even art bends beneath the weight. Painters like Dorothea Lange turn their lenses to the faces of the displaced, capturing eyes that look years older than the bodies they sit in. You walk past one such scene, a mother with furrowed brow, clutching her children as if her arms are the only roof left. You don't need a caption. You can feel the fear in the wrinkles around her mouth. Musicians, too, trade party tunes for ballads of despair. The carefree jazz of the 20s turns minor, bluesy, melancholy. Radios hum with songs about hunger and heartbreak, making kitchen silence even heavier. Politics begins to stir like a storm front. In America, you hear the first fiery speeches promising a New Deal. Crowds gather in muddy fields or crowded auditoriums, cheering a chance that government might finally throw a rope down into the pit. Some shake their heads, convinced it's false hope. Others cling to those words as if they're oxygen. Across Europe, though, the same desperation fuels darker promises. Men with loud voices and clenched fists shout that only strength, nationalism and scapegoats can fix the broken world. The ground rumbles with something dangerous rising, anger looking for someone to blame, and blame has plenty of targets. You hear whispers about foreigners, about minorities, about anyone different. Old prejudices flare hotter than ever, fanned by demagogues who thrive in despair. As you walk through a market in Berlin, you hear a man rant about how Germany's humiliation and hunger are someone else's fault. The crowd doesn't just listen, they nod. A shiver runs through you, because desperation makes people swallow poison when they're too hungry for hope. Meanwhile, daily survival is its own battle. You queue up at soup kitchens where steam clouds the air but never hides the thinness of the broth. A volunteer ladles out one portion per person, her smile warm but her hands trembling from fatigue. Behind you, a man mutters about how he used to own a shop on Fifth Avenue. In front, a boy clutches a tin cup too big for his hands. Rich or poor, yesterday or today, it doesn't matter. Everyone is levelled here. Out in the countryside, the dust still swirls. You stumble through abandoned farmhouses where wind whistles through broken shutters. Families have migrated west, piling everything onto rusty trucks. Some never make it. Their engines stall, their money runs out, their spirits break. Those who do arrive find crowded labour camps, lines of tents in California orchards, where wages barely buy bread. You crouch in one of these camps at night, the stars glittering indifferent above, as a harmonica wails somewhere in the dark. Quirky details stick with you. People sewing clothes from flour sacks, their children walking to school with gold medal or white rose logos still stamped across their shirts. Housewives trade recipes for mock apple pie, made with crackers instead of fruit. Survival breeds strange creativity, but you can't laugh. It's too raw, too close to hunger. The Great Depression isn't just an economic disaster, it's a collapse of trust. Trust in banks, in leaders, in neighbours, even in the future itself. And as you look around, you feel something chilling. When humanity loses faith in tomorrow, the door swings wide open for anything, good, bad, or monstrous, to step through. You stagger out of the bread lines and dust storms, thinking perhaps humanity has endured enough. But history is not that merciful. As the 30s grind on, the tension you felt brewing in speeches and whispers hardens into iron reality. The world is about to erupt again, this time on a scale that dwarfs even the carnage of the Great War. You blink, and the calendar has turned to 1939. Europe trembles, and within weeks the whole planet is pulled into the furnace of the Second World War. You find yourself in Warsaw as tanks rumble down cobbled streets, their tracks shattering paving stones and rattling your ribs. Civilians scatter, clutching suitcases, children crying as the sky darkens with planes. This isn't a battlefield somewhere far away. It's your neighbourhood turned to rubble overnight. Air raid sirens scream like banshees. You run for shelter, but the ground shakes with explosions that feel endless, as if the earth itself is coughing out its bones. The war is everywhere, not confined to muddy trenches this time. Cities become targets. You huddle in a London Underground station as bombs rain from the sky, shaking dust from the tunnel walls. A mother next to you sings softly to calm her baby, though her own voice quivers with terror. The lights flicker, and for a moment you wonder if the roof above will hold. By morning, whole streets will be gone, replaced by smoking craters and collapsed brick. Daily life twists into survival. Ration books dictate every meal. You're lucky to find a sliver of butter or a single egg. People tear pages from newspapers to use as makeshift toilet paper. You wear the same patched-up coat year after year, because new fabric is for uniforms, not civilians. Blackout curtains must cover every window. A single light might guide bombers. And while hunger gnaws, it's fear that truly eats you alive. The fear that tomorrow, your home, your family, your entire city might vanish. You hear rumours carried across borders, camps where entire populations are being erased, not just armies. At first it sounds impossible. But as months pass, whispers harden into undeniable truth. You can smell the ashes drifting on certain winds, hear the emptiness in voices of refugees who have lost not just homes but entire bloodlines. The scale of cruelty stretches beyond comprehension. You realise that this isn't only a war of armies, it's a war against humanity itself. And still, the fighting rages. From the deserts of North Africa to the frozen wastelands of Russia, soldiers march, fight, freeze, and fall. You're transported in a blink. Now you're in Stalingrad, where the cold cuts sharper than bullets. You press against a wall as mortar fire sprays rubble across the street. A soldier next to you chews on a piece of frozen bread so hard it chips his tooth. Hunger and frostbite become as deadly as bombs. The city is reduced to bones, and still neither side yields. It's a world gone mad. Factories churn day and night, producing weapons instead of warmth, tanks instead of tractors. Children collect scrap metal for the war effort. Women take up hammers, riveting planes while praying their sons return from the front. Entire nations are drafted into a single machine of destruction. The quirky details are unsettling. British families digging Anderson shelters in their backyards, literally sleeping underground like moles. American kids collecting bacon grease in jars, told it will be used to make explosives. In Tokyo, schoolchildren train with bamboo spears in case enemy soldiers land. Humanity has turned its creativity, its ingenuity, and even its children toward the service of death. And yet, through it all, people cling to strange slivers of normal life. In Paris, under occupation, you hear laughter from a cafe, half nervous, half defiant. In London, dance halls stay open even during the Blitz, the music competing with the wail of sirens. Somehow, humanity refuses to give up its pulse, even as the world around it burns. But make no mistake, this is the darkest hour yet. You sense it in the silence after a bombing raid, when you step outside and realise a neighbourhood you walked through yesterday no longer exists. You sense it when you catch the hollow stare of a prisoner behind barbed wire. The war is not just about soldiers. It has swallowed everyone, everywhere, whole. You wake up to silence. No bombs tonight, no sirens, no rattling windows. The war, after years of devouring every breath of life, has finally begun to sputter and die. You stand among ruins where cities once glowed, and for a moment, the absence of gunfire feels deafening. Streets are littered not with shells, but with the heavy weight of loss. Victory is declared, but it doesn't taste like triumph. It tastes like ashes. You wander through Berlin, and it's no longer a proud capital, but a skeleton of stone. Every building ripped open as if the city itself was dissected. Families push carts piled with what little they own, their faces hollow, eyes sunken. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the silence is even more haunting. Shadows burned into walls where people once stood. A whole city flattened in a heartbeat by weapons so powerful they make all previous wars look primitive. Humanity has crossed into a new, terrifying age, where survival could hinge on the press of a single button. The war's official end doesn't mean your suffering stops. Refugees flood roads, searching for homes that no longer exist. Food is scarce. Rationing continues long after the guns fall quiet. You taste bread that's half sawdust, drink thin broth that barely warms you. You share a single blanket with strangers in a crowded shelter, because every building that could house you was reduced to rubble. People barter with cigarettes instead of coins because money has lost its meaning. The emotional toll is worse than hunger. You carry scars invisible to the eye. The sound of footsteps in the night still makes you flinch. The smell of smoke brings you back to firestorms. Children draw pictures of tanks and planes because war is all they've ever known. Mothers keep setting an extra place at the table for sons who will never return. Soldiers, home at last, find themselves strangers in their own kitchens, haunted by memories that won't let them rest. One mainstream fact remains stark. By the end of 1945, over 50 million people, soldiers, civilians, men, women, children, are gone. Entire towns erased from maps, whole families erased from history. That's more than the population of some modern countries. Yet somehow life crawls forward. Babies are born in bombed-out hospitals. Couples marry amid ruins, holding on to love as their only weapon against despair. And then there are the stranger details, the almost absurd footnotes of survival. In Britain, victory celebrations are so starved for luxury that people dye their legs with tea to mimic stockings, silk being a long-forgotten luxury. In Japan, children chase after American soldiers for chewing gum, a treat more precious than gold. In Germany, people turn old Nazi flags into clothing, cutting away the symbols to make something wearable. These small, quirky acts become proof that no matter how bleak the world gets, the human instinct to adapt, sometimes with stubborn humour, refuses to die. You take a step back and realise the pattern. Humanity keeps clawing its way through fire, famine, plague, and war. Each age feels like the worst time to live, and maybe it was for the people trapped inside it. Yet here you are, still walking, still breathing, the story still carrying you forward. The Second World War leaves you exhausted, scarred, shaken to your bones, but not broken. The smoke clears, the dust settles, and a quiet dawn stretches over the rubble. You finally sense that this chapter, this worst of worst times, has closed. But the scars it carved into history will never fully fade. You walk through the silence, feeling the weight of every lost voice, and you know, this was not just another war. This was a reckoning with the very limits of what it means to be human. And now, after this long journey through some of the darkest chapters of our shared past, it's time to ease back. You've walked through caves with Homo habilis, starved with peasants in famine, shivered through plagues, crouched in trenches, and stood among the ruins of bombed-out cities. It's been heavy, hasn't it? The worst times to be human leave their weight on your chest, as though you carried centuries of sorrow in just one night. But here's the quiet truth. You made it through. Every terrible age eventually ended. People endured, adapted, and carried forward tiny sparks of life, laughter, and resilience. And because of them, you exist here and now, lying safely in your bed, far removed from the roar of lions in the dark or the scream of falling bombs. You're not in those times. You're safe. Let your breath slow down. Notice how the air in your room is steady, calm, and yours. No ration cards, no queues for bread, no distant sirens. Just you, the soft hum of your space, and the gentle rhythm of your heartbeat. The world you live in has its challenges, yes, but compared to the past, it is a place of light, abundance, and connection. Close your eyes and picture a small campfire, not in a cave of fear, but on a quiet shore where the night is calm. Imagine the glow on your face, warm and steady, keeping away the chill. Around you are not armies or plagues, but gentle waves and the whisper of the wind. You've left behind the worst times. Ahead lies only rest, only quiet. So breathe in deeply and let it out slowly. Let the weight of history slide off your shoulders. Tonight is not for struggle. Tonight is for peace. And as your thoughts drift away, may you carry with you the reminder that no matter how dark it gets, there is always light waiting to return.